Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. There was no file number in the folder, only a handwritten label in faint ink that read, Willamette Ridge, March 2019. My name is Rebecca Dalton, and I've been working in the FBI's Portland field office for 14 years. Many strange cases have crossed my desk, but when this file landed on it one gray Thursday morning, I knew immediately that something was different. The report inside was insufficient, as if someone had deliberately left out every detail that might lead to solving the case, almost as if it were intentionally vague. 3 missing persons, 4 days apart. The same area of the Oregon forest. All experienced hikers who knew the terrain as well as most people know their own backyard. The first disappearance was David Brennan, 42 years old. An outdoor guide from Portland with over 20 years of experience in the Cascade Range. He'd set out for a weekend solo hike on March 8th, a Friday. His cell phone signal was last picked up at 2:32 p.m. on the eastern slope of Willamette Ridge. When his girlfriend reported him missing Sunday evening, search and rescue teams mobilized immediately. They found his vehicle at the trailhead, nothing missing from inside, his wallet and keys still in the glove compartment. His GPS watch stopped recording at 6:18 a.m. on Saturday morning. The last coordinates pointed to a clearing deep in the forest, near an old ranger trail that hadn't been maintained in decades. The search teams found the clearing. They found his backpack, too, sitting upright against a Douglas fir like someone had carefully placed it there. Inside, water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, maps, everything you'd expect. Everything except David Brennan. What they did find, though, was something that made the local sheriff call us in. David Brennan's body was discovered 3 days later, 2 miles from that clearing, at the bottom of a steep ravine. The medical examiner's preliminary report noted severe hypothermia as the likely cause of death. But here's what didn't make sense. When they found him, his clothes were completely soaked through. Not damp, not wet from morning dew. Soaked, as if he'd been standing in heavy rain for hours. The problem was, according to every weather station, radar system, and meteorological record in the region, it hadn't rained in that area for 8 days. I stood in my office that Thursday morning, reading and rereading that detail. The Portland office is on the 5th floor of a federal building downtown, and from my window I could see the Willamette River cutting through the city, gray and cold under the March sky. Rain was falling, as it usually does in Oregon, a steady drizzle that blurred the edges of buildings and turned the streets into dark mirrors. I watched the rain for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. 4 days after Brennan's body was found, the second hiker went missing. Jennifer Walsh, 36, a biology teacher from Eugene who spent most of her weekends in the mountains. She was on a day hike, same general area as Brennan, though she'd taken a different trail. Her last Instagram post showed her smiling at a vista point, the forest stretching out behind her in shades of green and gray. The timestamp was 11:47 a.m., March 15th. She never made it back to her car. The search for Walsh was faster this time because the teams were already familiar with the area. They found her on March 17th, less than 48 hours after she was reported missing. She was in a grove of old-growth cedar, about 1.5 miles from where Brennan's backpack had been discovered. Like Brennan, she was soaked. Her hair was plastered to her skull, her jacket heavy with water, her boots squishing with every step the first responders took toward her body. And like Brennan, she died of hypothermia, in an area where it still hadn't rained. The third disappearance was what finally brought me out to Willamette Ridge myself. Marcus Chen, 51, a software engineer from Seattle who'd been hiking the Pacific Northwest trails for over 30 years. Experienced, careful, always filed trip plans with the ranger station. He went missing on March 19th, just 2 days after Jennifer Walsh's body was found. By this point, the local authorities had started closing trails, putting up warnings, trying to figure out what the hell was happening in those woods. I drove out to the ridge on March 21st with my partner, Agent James Holden. Holden's been with the Bureau for 7 years, most of it in cybercrime, but he'd requested a transfer to field investigations 6 months ago. This was his first major case. He was quiet for most of the 2-hour drive, staring out the window at the endless trees that lined Highway 26. "What do you think we're looking at?" he asked, as we turned onto a logging road that would take us up to the search command post. "Serial killer? Someone luring hikers off the trail?" I'd been thinking about that since I first opened the file. A serial killer was the obvious answer, the one that made the most sense from an investigative standpoint. But serial killers don't control the weather. They don't make bodies appear soaking wet in the middle of a drought. "I don't know," I said, "but we're going to find out." The command post was set up in a gravel parking lot near the Wildwood Trailhead, about 6 miles from where Brennan and Walsh had been found. There were 3 search and rescue trucks, 2 sheriff's vehicles and a Forest Service ranger truck parked in a rough semicircle. A large tent had been erected in the center, and I could see people moving inside, shadows against the canvas. The air smelled like pine and wet earth, even though it wasn't raining. It hadn't been raining, that's what everyone kept saying, as if repetition would somehow make it make sense. I met the incident commander, a grizzled search and rescue coordinator named Frank Garrett, who looked like he'd spent his entire life in these mountains. He had that weathered face you see on people who work outdoors, deep lines around his eyes, skin tanned and tough. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Agent Dalton," he said, glancing at Holden. "Agent Holden, thanks for coming out. We could use the help." "Fill me in on Marcus Chen," I said. "What do we know?" Garrett led us into the tent where a large topographical map had been spread across a folding table. Red pins marked the locations where Brennan and Walsh had been found. A blue pin showed where Chen's car was parked, and a series of yellow pins traced the search grid. "Chen checked in at the ranger station at 7:15 a.m. on the 19th, Garrett said, pointing to the map. Said he was planning to hike the Rimrock Trail, should be back by 5. When he didn't show up by 7, the ranger called it in. We started the search at first light on the 20th. Any sign of him? Nothing. We've had teams combing every inch of that trail and the surrounding area. Dogs, drones, infrared, it's like he vanished." I studied the map, noting the distances between the 3 incidents. They formed a rough triangle, with each point about 2 to 3 miles from the others. The terrain was dense forest, steep slopes, dozens of ravines and creek beds that could hide a body for years if you didn't know where to look. "What about the rain?" Holden asked. "The reports said the first 2 victims were soaked when you found them." Garrett's expression darkened. "Yeah, that's the part that doesn't make any damn sense. I've been running search and rescue in these mountains for 23 years. I know weather. I know how to read a sky, and I'm telling you, it did not rain here. Not a drop. But those bodies," he trailed off, shaking his head. "They were drenched, like they'd been standing in a downpour. Could they have fallen in a stream?" I asked. "Gotten wet that way?" "Brennan was nowhere near water when we found him. Walsh was close to a creek, but it was barely a trickle this time of year. And their clothes weren't just wet, they were saturated, heavy, like they'd been in rain for hours. I exchanged a glance with Holden. He looked as confused as I felt. "What did the families say?" I asked. "Did any of the victims mention anything unusual? Strange encounters? Weird feelings about the area?" "I can get you their statements," Garrett said. "But nothing jumped out. They were all experienced hikers. They knew what they were doing." A young ranger poked his head into the tent. "Frank, we've got something." We followed Garrett out of the tent and down a muddy trail that cut through the forest. The trees here were massive, old-growth Douglas fir and cedar that blocked out most of the sky. The understory was thick with ferns and salal, and the ground was soft with decades of fallen needles and decomposing leaves. It was the kind of forest that felt primordial, like you'd stepped back in time to when humans were just visitors, not conquerors. After about 15 minutes of hiking, we reached a small clearing where a search team had gathered. They were standing around something on the ground, and as we got closer, I could see what it was. A jacket. Blue Gore-Tex, expensive looking. It was spread out on the forest floor, arms extended, like someone had carefully arranged it. And it was soaking wet. "That's Chen's," one of the searchers said. "His girlfriend identified it from the photo we sent. He was wearing it when he left his car." I knelt down next to the jacket, careful not to touch it. Water was still dripping from the fabric, forming a small puddle underneath. I looked up at the sky through the break in the canopy. Overcast, gray, but no rain. The ground around the jacket was damp, but not wet, the kind of moisture you'd expect from morning dew and fog. "How long has it been here?" I asked. "Can't say for sure," Garrett replied. "We swept this area yesterday morning and didn't see it, so sometime in the last 24 hours. I stood up, looking around the clearing. It was small, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by ferns and young hemlocks. There was nothing remarkable about it, nothing that would make it stand out from 1,000 other clearings in these woods. But someone had left that jacket here, or something had. "Bag it," I told the search team. "Get it to the lab. I want to know everything about that water. Where it came from, what's in it, how long it's been wet." As the team carefully placed the jacket in an evidence bag, I walked the perimeter of the clearing. Holden followed me, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't random. The jacket had been placed here, deliberately, like the backpack had been placed against that tree, like the bodies had been placed in spots where search teams would eventually find them. "Someone staging this," Holden said quietly. "This is too careful, too deliberate." "Maybe," I said. "But staging for what? What's the message?" We didn't have an answer. Not yet. That night, I stayed at a small motel in Brightwood, a tiny logging town about 20 minutes from the search area. The room was basic but clean, with wood-paneled walls and a window that looked out at the forest. I spent hours going through the case files, reading statements from the victims' families, studying the topographical maps, trying to find a pattern. Around midnight, I heard it. Rain. Not heavy, just a steady patter against the window, the kind of soft rain that Oregon is famous for. I got up and looked outside. The parking lot was wet, puddles forming under the yellow glow of the streetlights. Rain was falling, normal spring rain, the kind that happens every day here. I checked my phone. The weather app showed clear skies, no precipitation. I refreshed it, still clear. I opened 3 different weather apps, checked the radar, looked at the local news. Every single source said the same thing. No rain in the forecast, no rain currently falling, no rain recorded in the area, but I could see it. I could hear it. I opened the window and stuck my hand out. feeling the drops hit my palm, cold and real. I grabbed my jacket and went outside. The rain was light but steady, soaking into my hair, running down my face. Other motel guests were in their rooms, lights off, presumably sleeping. I was the only one standing in the parking lot, getting wet in rain that, according to every piece of technology available to modern meteorology, wasn't happening. I stood there for 10 minutes, maybe 15, just letting it fall on me. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The air went still. The only sound was water dripping from the eaves of the motel roof. I went back inside, dripping water on the thin carpet. I dried off with a towel and sat on the bed, staring at my phone. Every weather app still showed clear skies. No precipitation recorded, no rain. But my hair was wet. My jacket was soaked. The parking lot outside was covered in puddles that would be gone by morning. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about David Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, the jacket in the clearing. I kept thinking about the rain that wasn't supposed to exist, falling on ground that official records would say stayed dry. By morning, the puddles were gone. The pavement was bone dry, as if the rain had never happened at all. And when I asked the motel clerk about the weather last night, she looked at me confused and said, "Rain? It didn't rain last night." But it had. I knew it had. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with something that followed normal rules. We weren't dealing with something that could be explained by meteorology or logic or any of the tools we use to make sense of the world. We were dealing with something else entirely. The forensic report on Marcus Chen's jacket came back 3 days later, and it raised more questions than it answered. The water that had soaked the fabric was ordinary rainwater, pH levels normal, mineral content consistent with precipitation in the Oregon Cascade region. There was nothing unusual about it chemically. No toxins, no foreign substances, no anomalies that would explain why it was there when it shouldn't have been. But there was one detail that caught my attention. The lab tech who analyzed it noted that the water contained trace amounts of pollen from Douglas fir trees, which was normal for the area. What wasn't normal was the concentration. According to the analysis, the pollen levels in that water were consistent with heavy spring rain, the kind that comes in May or June when the trees are actively releasing pollen into the air. It was March. The firs weren't pollinating yet. Wouldn't be for another 2 months. I called the lab and spoke to the tech directly. A woman named Dr. Sarah Brenner, who'd been doing forensic analysis for the Bureau for 12 years. "Are you sure about the pollen dating?" I asked. "Positive," she said. "I ran it twice to be certain. That water fell from the sky sometime in late May or early June, based on the pollen signature. But you found the jacket on March 21st. That's impossible." "I know. That's why I ran it twice." I thanked her and hung up, staring at my notes. Rain that fell 2 months before it happened. Bodies soaked in water that shouldn't exist. A forest where the rules of weather and time seemed to bend in ways that made no sense. Marcus Chen's body was found on March 25th, 6 days after he went missing. A search dog picked up his scent near an old logging road about 3 miles from where his jacket had been discovered. The dog led the team down a steep slope, through dense underbrush, to a small depression surrounded by ancient cedar trees. Chen was there, curled on his side, arms wrapped around his chest. His eyes were open. His skin was pale and waxy. He'd been dead for at least 3 days, probably longer. And he was completely soaked. Water pooled beneath his body. His clothes were heavy with it, dripping even though he'd been dead for days. The medical examiner who responded to the scene, a methodical man named Dr. Raymond Pierce, stood next to the body for a long time, just looking at it. "This doesn't make sense," he finally said. "Join the club," I replied. Dr. Pierce conducted the autopsy the next day. I attended, along with Holden and the Clackamas County Sheriff, a no-nonsense woman named Diane Kowalski, who'd been working these mountains for 15 years. The autopsy suite was in a basement in Oregon City, fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the cold air. Chen's body was in worse condition than Brennan's or Walsh's had been, more decomposition, but the cause of death was the same: severe hypothermia. His core temperature when found had been ambient with the surrounding air, but based on the tissue samples and lividity patterns, Dr. Pierce estimated he'd died within 12 hours of going missing. "The interesting thing," Pierce said, gesturing to Chen's hands, "is the skin condition. Look at his fingertips." I leaned in closer. The skin on Chen's fingers was wrinkled, deeply pruned, the way skin gets when it's been submerged in water for a long time. "How long would he need to be in water to get that level of wrinkling?" Holden asked. "Hours," Pierce said. "At least 4 or 5, possibly longer. But here's what I don't understand. The rest of his body doesn't show signs of immersion. No water in the lungs, no evidence he was in a stream or lake, just wet, soaked through, like he'd been standing in heavy rain." "The weather reports," Sheriff Kowalski started to say. "I know," Pierce interrupted. "I checked, no rain. But I'm telling you, this man was exposed to water for hours before he died. Prolonged exposure, constant saturation. That's what killed him. His body temperature dropped because he couldn't stay warm in wet clothes." We stood around the autopsy table, 4 law enforcement professionals staring at a body that defied explanation. Finally, Kowalski spoke. "I've lived in Oregon my whole life," she said quietly. "My grandfather was a logger, worked these forests in the 50s and 60s. He used to tell stories about the old-timers, the men who'd been cutting trees since before World War I. They had superstitions about certain areas, places they wouldn't work after dark, groves they'd avoid even in daylight. My grandfather always said it was nonsense, but..." She trailed off, looking at Chen's body. "Maybe it wasn't." I didn't believe in superstitions. I'd built my career on evidence, on facts that could be proven and documented and presented in court. But standing in that autopsy suite, looking at a man who'd died from rain that never fell, I felt the foundations of my certainty beginning to crack. That afternoon, I drove back out to Willamette Ridge. I needed to see the places where the victims had been found, needed to walk the ground myself and try to understand what was happening here. Holden came with me, and we started at the clearing where David Brennan's backpack had been discovered. The forest was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a nature hike, but something deeper, heavier. There were no bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush, no sound except our footsteps on the soft ground and our own breathing. The Douglas firs towered above us, their trunks massive and dark, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the gray March light into a dim, greenish twilight. We found the tree where the backpack had been placed. There was still a small flag marking the spot, orange plastic fluttering in the breeze. I stood there, turning slowly, taking in the surroundings. Nothing unusual, just forest, endless forest, stretching in every direction. "You hear that?" Holden asked suddenly. I stopped moving and listened. At first, I didn't hear anything unusual. Then, very faintly, I caught it. A sound like footsteps, soft and irregular, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. "Hello?" I called out. "This is the FBI. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. The forest went completely silent again, that heavy, waiting silence. We stood there for what felt like a long time, listening, hands near our weapons. Nothing moved. No one answered. "Probably an animal," Holden said, but he didn't sound convinced. We hiked to the other 2 sites, the grove where Jennifer Walsh had been found, and the depression where Marcus Chen's body had lain. Both places had the same quality of silence, the same sense of waiting. At the Chen site, I noticed something I hadn't seen in the photographs. The cedar trees that ringed the depression had unusual bark patterns, deep gouges, and marks that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing. "Are those bear marks?" I asked Holden. He came closer, examining the trees. "I don't think so. Wrong pattern. Bears claw vertically, these are horizontal, and look at how deep they are." I ran my hand over one of the gouges. The cedar bark was torn away in long strips, exposing the reddish wood beneath. The marks were old, weathered, but still visible. And they did look deliberate, like someone had carved them with a blade or a sharp tool. "We should document this," I said, pulling out my phone to take pictures. As I raised the camera, the phone screen flickered. The battery indicator jumped from 87% to 23% in an instant. I lowered the phone, and the battery jumped back up to 85%. "Holden, check your phone." He pulled out his phone and frowned. "Battery's at 41%. It was full when we left the car." We both stood there, watching our phones as the battery levels dropped and rose seemingly at random. Mine went from 85% to 12% to 67% in the span of 30 seconds. Holden's went dead, the screen going black, then powered back on showing 98% charge. "Equipment malfunction?" Holden suggested, but he looked uneasy. I didn't answer. I was thinking about the weather radar showing clear skies while rain fell. I was thinking about water that came from 2 months in the future. I was thinking about the way technology seemed to break down in this place, unable to measure or record what was actually happening. We hiked back to the car in silence. The sun was starting to set, the forest growing darker, the shadows between the trees deepening into pools of black. I kept hearing those footsteps, soft and irregular, always just out of sight. Always stopping when we stopped. Always resuming when we moved again. By the time we reached the parking lot, full dark had fallen. Our car sat alone under a flickering light pole, and I was relieved to be leaving the forest behind. We drove back to Brightwood, neither of us speaking much, both of us processing what we'd seen and heard. That night, I interviewed the families of the victims. Video calls, since they were scattered across Oregon and Washington. David Brennan's girlfriend, a soft-spoken woman named Lisa, told me David had mentioned something strange the week before he disappeared. "He said the forest felt different," she told me, her face pixelated on my laptop screen. He'd been hiking that area for years, knew every trail, every landmark, but that last week, he said something felt off, like the forest was holding its breath. "Did he mention anything specific?" I asked. "Anything unusual he saw or heard?" "Not really, just that feeling. He almost canceled the trip, but then he figured he was just being paranoid." Jennifer Walsh's sister, Margaret, had a similar story. Jenny called me the night before she went missing. She was excited about the hike, but she mentioned that the weather had been strange lately. She said it felt like rain was coming, even though the forecast was clear. She kept checking the sky expecting clouds, but there weren't any. Marcus Chen's wife, Linda, was more skeptical. Marcus was a practical man, she said. He didn't believe in feelings or intuition. If there was something wrong, he would have seen evidence of it. He would have documented it, taken pictures, made notes. He wouldn't just have a feeling. "Did he leave any notes?" I asked. "Anything from his last hike?" The police gave me his backpack. There was a small notebook inside where he tracked his hikes. The last entry was from March 19th, the morning he disappeared. Just standard stuff, weather conditions, trail markers, birds he'd seen, nothing unusual. "Can you read me that entry?" I heard papers rustling. Then Linda's voice, steady but sad. March 19th, 7:30 a.m. Clear skies. Temperature approximately 48 degrees. Starting Rimrock Trail, visibility good. Humidity feels high, unusual for forecast. Will monitor conditions. Humidity feels high. Like Jennifer Walsh's feeling that rain was coming. Like David Brennan's sense that something was different. After the calls, I sat in my motel room and compiled my notes. 3 experienced hikers, all killed by hypothermia after prolonged exposure to rain. Rain that fell in an area where no precipitation was recorded. Rain that, according to pollen analysis, came from 2 months in the future. All 3 victims had reported feeling like rain was coming, even though the sky was clear. And there was something else. Something that nagged at me. I pulled out the topographical map and marked the 3 locations where bodies had been found. Then I marked where the backpack and jacket had been discovered. The 5 points formed a rough pattern. Not quite a circle, but close, and in the center of that pattern was an area that no search team had thoroughly explored yet. A dense section of old-growth forest marked on the map as Deadfall Creek. I made a decision. Tomorrow, we were going to Deadfall Creek. But that night, lying in bed and trying to sleep, I heard the rain again. Soft at first, then heavier, drumming against the window, running in rivulets down the glass. I got up and looked outside. The parking lot was dry, the sky was clear. I could see stars, but I could hear the rain. And when I opened the window and stuck my hand out, I felt water hitting my palm. Cold and real and impossible. I pulled my hand back in and closed the window. The rain stopped. The night went silent. I didn't check the weather apps. I knew what they would say. I knew that officially in the world of recorded data and verified information it wasn't raining. But in some other world, some other version of reality that existed alongside ours, overlapping but not quite touching, it was raining. It had been raining for a long time. And somehow, in this forest, the boundary between those 2 worlds was thin enough that the rain could bleed through. We set out for Deadfall Creek at first light. A 6-person team consisting of myself, Holden, Sheriff Kowalski, 2 of her deputies, and a Forest Service ranger named Thomas Webb, who knew the area better than anyone. Webb was in his 50s, lean and weathered, with the kind of quiet competence that comes from decades of working in the wilderness. He'd brought topographical maps that were more detailed than anything we had, hand-annotated with notes about terrain features, water sources, and old logging roads. Deadfall Creek used to be a logging camp back in the 20s, Webb explained as we loaded our gear. Shut down in 1927 after a particularly bad winter. Company lost 3 men, never really said how. After that, they abandoned the area. It's been wild ever since. 3 men, I asked. How did they die? Webb shrugged. Records aren't clear. Official cause was listed as exposure, but there were rumors. The old-timers said the men were found in their bunks, soaking wet, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. But you know how stories get exaggerated over time. I exchanged a glance with Holden. Exposure. Soaking wet, no rain. Has anyone disappeared from that area recently? Kowalski asked. Besides our 3 victims. Not that I know of, Webb said. But it's remote. If someone went missing and no one reported it, we might never know. The hike to Deadfall Creek took almost 3 hours. We followed a combination of old logging roads and game trails, pushing through dense underbrush and climbing over fallen trees that must have been lying there for decades. The forest was old here, truly old, the kind of old growth that existed before Europeans came to Oregon. The Douglas firs and cedars were massive, their trunks 10 feet across, their tops lost in the canopy far above. The understory was a tangle of ferns, salal, and devil's club, and the ground was soft with centuries of decomposition. The silence persisted. No birds, no insects, no sound except our breathing and footsteps. About halfway to our destination, one of the deputies, a young man named Rivera, spoke up. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" We all stopped. I looked around at the trees, the shadows, the endless repetition of trunks and branches fading into green-gray distance. "I feel it too," the other deputy, a woman named Chen, said quietly. "Like something's keeping pace with us." Webb nodded. "That's normal in these old forests. It's just the quiet. Makes you hyper-aware. Your brain starts filling in the gaps." But it didn't feel like my brain filling in gaps. It felt like something was actually there, moving parallel to our path, staying just out of sight. I found myself checking over my shoulder every few minutes, scanning the trees, looking for movement. We reached Deadfall Creek around 10:30 a.m. The creek itself was small, barely more than a trickle flowing over moss-covered rocks. But the area around it was distinctive. The forest opened up slightly, creating a natural clearing about 50 yards across. In the center of the clearing was a stone foundation, all that remained of the old logging camp. The stones were dark with age and covered in lichen, and wildflowers grew in the gaps where mortar had crumbled away. "This is where the bunkhouse was," Webb said, pointing to the foundation. "The men who died were found in there." We spread out, examining the area. Holden and I focused on the foundation while the others searched the perimeter of the clearing. The stones were cold to the touch, much colder than the ambient air temperature. I ran my hand along the top of the foundation wall and felt something strange. A vibration. Faint, but constant. Like a low-frequency hum. "You feel that?" I asked Holden. He pressed his palm against the stone. "Yeah. What is that, underground stream?" "Maybe, but I didn't think so." The vibration felt wrong somehow, not like water or earth moving. It felt deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a pulse. That's when Deputy Chen called out from the edge of the clearing. "Agent Dalton, you need to see this." We jogged over to where she was standing near a large cedar tree. She was pointing at something carved into the bark, but much more elaborate than the marks we'd seen at the other sites. This was clearly writing, though not in any alphabet I recognized. The symbols were angular, geometric, arranged in vertical columns that ran down the trunk for 6 or 7 feet. "Is that some kind of Native American writing?" Kowalski asked. Webb shook his head. "I'm not an expert, but I know the local tribes. This doesn't match any of their systems, and it's too fresh. These marks can't be more than a few years old." I took out my phone to photograph the symbols, and immediately the battery dropped from 91% to 7%. The screen flickered, showing strange artifacts, lines of static cutting across the image. I lowered the phone, and the battery jumped back to 83%. "Same problem as yesterday," Holden muttered. "Something about this area interferes with electronics." We documented the symbols the old-fashioned way, with pencil and paper, one of the deputies sketching them into a notebook. While they worked, I walked the perimeter of the clearing trying to understand the layout. The foundation was roughly in the center. The creek ran along the western edge. The trees formed a nearly perfect circle around the clearing, all of them ancient cedars, all with those strange marks carved into their bark. And then I found the recorder. It was lying on the ground near the base of one of the cedars, half buried in fallen needles and moss. A small, digital voice recorder, the kind that reporters use for interviews. The casing was scratched and dirty, but when I picked it up and pressed the power button, it turned on. The screen showed one audio file, dated March 19, 2019, the day Marcus Chen had disappeared. "Holden," I called. He came over, and we stood there looking at the recorder. The battery indicator showed 15%, which was strange because these devices usually died much faster when exposed to the elements. "Should we play it here?" Holden asked. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to hear what was on that recording immediately. But part of me, the part that had been listening to phantom rain and feeling watched in the forest, thought we should wait until we were somewhere safer. We'll take it back, I decided. Bag it as evidence. We can listen to it at the office. While the recorder was being placed in an evidence bag, I noticed something else. Near where I'd found it, there was a pattern in the fallen needles on the ground. Not quite a path, but a disturbance, like something had been dragged through. I followed the disturbance with my eyes, tracing it from the cedar tree toward the foundation, then stopping abruptly about 10 feet from the stones. "Everyone stay back from the foundation," I said sharply. The team froze. Kowalski looked at me. "What is it?" "I'm not sure, but something was dragged from that tree toward the foundation, and I don't want anyone stepping on potential evidence." We carefully examined the area. The disturbance in the needles was subtle, but once you saw it, it was clear. Something had been pulled or had crawled from the tree to the foundation, then vanished. There were no footprints, no clear drag marks, just that subtle disturbance in the ground cover. And then, as we were examining the pattern, it started to rain, not everywhere, just in the clearing. Rain began falling from a clear sky, heavy drops that hit the stone foundation and the ground around it, creating a soft, pattering sound. The rest of the forest stayed dry. I could see the boundary, a sharp line where rain fell on one side and didn't fall on the other. "What the hell?" Rivera whispered. We stood there watching rain fall from a cloudless sky, watching it soak into the ground around the foundation, watching it run over the old stones. I pulled out my phone. Weather app showed clear conditions. Radar showed no precipitation within 50 miles. The rain fell for exactly 3 minutes. Then it stopped, as abruptly as it had started. The ground was wet, the foundation stones were slick with water, but the trees around the perimeter of the clearing were bone dry. "Did everyone see that?" I asked, needing confirmation that I wasn't hallucinating. They all nodded, faces pale, nobody speaking. "We need to get out of here," Webb said quietly. "Now." Nobody argued. We packed up our evidence and started hiking back the way we'd come. But as we were leaving the clearing, I heard something that made me stop. A voice, faint and distant, calling from somewhere in the forest. "Help?" Just that one word, barely audible, gender indeterminate. Everyone heard it. We all froze, listening. "Help," again, from a different direction this time. Then again, from a third direction. The same voice, the same word, coming from multiple locations simultaneously. "That's not possible," Deputy Chen said. But it was happening. The voice kept calling, "Help," over and over, circling us, always just out of sight. "Keep moving," I ordered. "Don't respond. Don't look for the source, just keep moving." We hiked out of there, faster than we'd hiked in, pushing through the underbrush, climbing over fallen logs, not stopping until we were back on the maintained trail. The voice faded behind us, and eventually the normal sounds of the forest returned. Birds calling, wind rustling the branches. The ordinary sounds of life that had been absent from Deadfall Creek. We made it back to the vehicles by early afternoon. Nobody spoke during the drive back to Brightwood. We were all processing what we'd seen, trying to fit it into a framework that made sense, trying to maintain some semblance of rational explanation. That evening, back in my motel room, I finally listened to the recording we'd found. Holden was with me, along with Sheriff Kowalski. We closed the curtains, locked the door, and I pressed play on the digital recorder. At first, there was just static, white noise that filled the small room. Then, gradually, a voice emerged. Male, calm, matter-of-fact. "This is Marcus Chen. It's March 19th, approximately 3:30 p.m. I'm near Deadfall Creek and something strange is happening." A pause, In the background, I could hear wind in the trees, normal forest sounds. It's starting to rain, but the sky is clear. I can see blue sky through the canopy, no clouds, but rain is falling, heavy rain. I'm getting soaked. Another pause. The sound of rain grew louder in the recording, a heavy downpour. I'm going to try to find shelter. The rain is cold. I can't see more than a few feet in front of me now. It's like a curtain of water. Silence for several seconds. Then, Chen's voice again, but different now. Scared. I can hear someone calling for help, but when I look, there's no one there, just rain, just endless rain. More silence. The rain sound continued, constant, heavy. I don't understand. The rain should have stopped by now. It's been falling for over an hour. My clothes are completely soaked. I'm getting cold. I need to get to the car. A long pause. When Chen spoke again, his voice was slurred, sluggish. Can't remember which direction. Everything looks the same, just trees and rain. Trees and rain. Someone's still calling. I can't find them. I keep walking toward the voice, but it moves. It's always somewhere else. Another pause, even longer this time. The rain continued, relentless. So cold. Have to keep moving. Can't stop. If I stop, I'll... The sentence trailed off. Then, for the last 30 seconds of the recording, there was just rain. No voice, no movement. Just the endless sound of water falling from a clear sky. The recording ended. We sat in silence for a long moment. He walked in circles, Kowalski finally said. Kept hearing that voice calling for help, kept trying to find it until the hypothermia killed him. But why? Holden asked. What's causing this? What's making it rain? What's making that voice? I rewound the recording and played the last 30 seconds again. Just rain, constant and unchanging. But as I listened more carefully, I realized there was something else buried in the sound. A rhythm, faint but present. Like footsteps. Like something walking through the rain, circling, always circling. There's something else on the recording, I said. Listen. I played it again, turning the volume up. The footsteps were clearer now. Soft but distinct, a deliberate pace, and beneath that, even fainter, something that might have been breathing, or might have been the wind, or might have been something else entirely. We need to send this to the audio lab, I said. Have them clean it up, isolate the different sound layers. There's something here we're not hearing clearly. That night, alone in my motel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus Chen walking through phantom rain, hearing phantom voices, dying of exposure in a place where officially it was a clear, dry day. I kept thinking about the symbols carved into the trees, the stone foundation, the rain falling in that clearing from a cloudless sky. Around 2 a.m. I heard it again. Rain outside my window. I didn't bother checking the weather apps. I didn't open the curtain. I just lay there, listening to water hitting glass, listening to something that existed in the gap between what was real and what was recorded. And I heard something else, too. Footsteps in the parking lot, slow and deliberate. A voice faint and distant, calling a single word over and over. Help. But I didn't go to the window. I didn't look outside. I just pulled the covers over my head and waited for dawn. The audio enhancement came back from the FBI lab in Quantico 3 days later. I was back in the Portland office, having left Brightwood and Willamette Ridge behind, at least physically. Mentally, I was still there, still hearing that voice calling for help, still seeing rain fall from clear skies. The technician who'd worked on the file, a specialist named Marcus Stone, called me directly. That should have been my first warning. Lab techs don't usually call field agents. They send reports, cold technical documents filled with data and analysis. Phone calls meant something had rattled them. "Agent Dalton," Stone said, "I need you to understand something before I send you the enhanced file. I've been doing audio forensics for the Bureau for 19 years. I've cleaned up wiretap recordings, death threats, ransom calls, cockpit voice recorders from plane crashes. I've heard everything. This is different." "Different how?" A pause. "Just listen to it. You'll understand. And Agent Dalton, don't listen alone." The file arrived in my email an hour later. I called Holden into my office, closed the door, and we played it together. Stone had isolated 3 separate audio layers from Marcus Chen's recording. Layer 1 was Chen's voice, clear now, without the static and interference. His account of the rain, the cold, the disorientation. Nothing we hadn't heard before, just clearer. Layer 2 was the rain sound. But Stone had analyzed the frequency and pattern, and according to his notes, the rain wasn't falling naturally. The rhythm was too regular, too precise. It was more like white noise that had been carefully modulated to sound like rain, with subtle variations repeated in exact cycles every 47 seconds. Layer 3 was the footsteps and the breathing. Stone had enhanced these significantly, bringing them up from barely audible to clear and distinct. And what we heard made my blood run cold. The footsteps weren't human, the spacing was wrong, the rhythm off, and there were too many of them, at least 6 or 7 distinct sets, all moving in that same deliberate pace, all circling the point where Chen must have been standing. But it was the breathing that was worst. When Stone had isolated and enhanced it, it didn't sound like breathing at all. It sounded like a word, repeated over and over in a harsh whisper. "Wait." Not "help." Wait. "There's one more thing," Stone's notes said. At the very end of the recording, there's a sound that the original equipment couldn't capture because it's below normal human hearing range. I shifted the frequency up so you can hear it. Holden and I exchanged a glance, and I clicked on the final file. For 5 seconds there was silence, then a voice, clear and cold and utterly wrong. 3 more, that was all. Just those 2 words. Then nothing. I stopped the playback and sat back in my chair trying to process what I'd just heard. 3 more what? Holden asked quietly. I didn't answer because I was thinking about the number 3 victims. David Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Chen, and that voice saying 3 more on March 19th, the day Chen died. "We need to look at unsolved cases," I said. "Disappearances in that area going back as far as records exist. If this has happened before, it has," a voice said from the doorway. I looked up. Frank Garrett, the search and rescue coordinator, was standing there. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "How did you?" I started to ask. "Sheriff Kowalski called me. Told me about the recording. I need to tell you something I should have told you from the beginning." He came into the office and closed the door behind him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost ashamed. "This isn't the first time. Back in 1983, 3 hikers went missing in the Willamette Ridge area, all found dead of hypothermia, all soaked with water even though it hadn't rained. Before that, 1957, same thing. 3 more, and in the Forest Service archives, there are reports going back to the 20s. Always 3. Always the same way. "Why didn't you say something?" I demanded. "Because no one believes it. Every time it happens, there's an investigation. They find natural explanations, blame it on freak weather patterns, local microclimates, anything to make it make sense. The files get buried, the families accept the explanations, and everyone forgets, until it happens again." I felt anger rising in my chest. "People died. People are going to keep dying." "I know," Garrett's voice was sharp now. "You think I don't know that? I've been running search and rescue in these mountains for over 20 years. I've found the bodies. I've had to tell the families, and I've tried, Agent Dalton. I've tried to warn people to close trails, to get someone to take this seriously. But no one listens, because it's impossible, because it doesn't make sense." The room went silent. Holden was staring at Garrett, and I could see he was processing the same thing I was. This wasn't just a case. This was a pattern that had been repeating for almost a century, killing 3 people at a time, regular as clockwork. "How often?" I asked. "How often does it happen?" Garrett pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket, a list written in shaky handwriting. 1927, 3 loggers. 1957, 3 hikers. 1983, 3 backpackers. 2004, 3 hunters. And now, 2019, 3 more. Every 21 or 22 years, almost to the day. 21 years. I did the math quickly. The next cycle would be 2040 or 2041. "We need to make this official," I said. "File reports, document everything. Make sure the information doesn't get buried this time." Garrett laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Go ahead and try. I've watched 5 different agencies investigate this over the years. FBI, State Police, Forest Service, even brought in some academics once. They all find the same things we found. Impossible rain, strange sounds, bodies that don't make sense. And every single time the reports get filed away. Too weird, too unexplainable. Easier to blame it on weather anomalies and close the case." I wanted to argue, to say this time would be different. But I was starting to understand what Garrett meant. How do you write a report that says rain falls from clear skies? How do you explain audio recordings of voices that shouldn't exist? How do you put into official documentation that the forest itself seems to be doing something that violates every law of physics and meteorology? "What about the symbols?" Holden asked. "The marks on the trees at Deadfall Creek. Someone carved those. That's physical evidence." "Documented in 1983, Garrett said. "Archaeologists from the University of Oregon came out to look at them. His report said they weren't Native American, weren't any known writing system. His theory was they were some kind of logging camp graffiti made by bored workers in the 20s. He dated them to around 1925 or 1926. "But you said the marks looked fresh," I pointed out. "They do. They always do. That's part of it. The symbols get documented. Then the next time someone goes to Deadfall Creek, they're still there, still looking fresh. Like they were carved yesterday." We sat in silence, the weight of what Garrett was telling us settling over the room like a heavy blanket. Somewhere in the building, phones were ringing, agents were working cases. The normal machinery of law enforcement was grinding forward. But in this office, we were talking about something that existed outside that machinery, something that couldn't be investigated or documented or solved. "What do you think it is?" Holden finally asked. "What's doing this?" Garrett shook his head. "I don't know. My grandfather, the one who was a logger, he had a theory. He said the old-timers believed there were places in the forest that belonged to something else. Not spirits exactly, not ghosts, just something old, something that was here before us and will be here after we're gone. They said those places had rules, and if you broke the rules, the place would take you." "What rules?" I asked. "That's the thing. Nobody knows. The people who break the rules don't come back to tell us what they did wrong." After Garrett left, Holden and I spent hours going through records, pulling every unsolved disappearance and death in the Willamette Ridge area going back to the 20s. The pattern was there, clear, once you knew to look for it. 3 deaths, spaced roughly 21 years apart, always in March, always near Deadfall Creek. always with the same impossible circumstances. But there was something else I noticed. Between the major incidents, there were others. Single disappearances, bodies never found, scattered throughout the decades. And when I plotted them on a map, they formed a rough circle, with Deadfall Creek at the center, like ripples spreading out from a stone dropped in still water. "It's expanding," I said, showing Holden the map. "Whatever's happening at Deadfall Creek, it's not confined there. It's spreading. Slowly, but spreading." "What do we do?" Holden asked. I didn't have an answer. What could we do? Close the entire forest? Based on what evidence? Rain that nobody officially recorded? Audio analysis that showed impossible sounds? Symbols carved in trees that never age? That night, I wrote my report. I documented everything we'd found. The bodies, the weather anomalies, the audio recording, the symbols, the pattern of deaths going back almost a century. I wrote it all in precise, professional language, knowing, even as I typed, that it would be filed away, forgotten, dismissed as the overactive imagination of an agent who'd spent too much time in the woods. I submitted the report the next morning. 3 days later, I was called into my supervisor's office. Assistant Director Catherine Marks, a woman I'd worked with for 8 years, a woman I respected and trusted. "Agent Dalton," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've read your report on the Willamette Ridge cases. And officially, the cases are closed. David Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, and Marcus Chen died of exposure due to unexpected weather conditions. The meteorological data shows clear skies, but there are known phenomena called local microclimates that can produce precipitation in very small areas without appearing on radar. It's rare, but it happens. That's our official explanation. You don't believe that." She looked at me for a long moment. "It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what we can prove, what we can document, what will hold up in court or in public disclosure. Your report is thorough, Agent Dalton. It's good work, but it's not something we can act on officially." "People will die," I said. "In 21 years, 3 more people will die in that forest. Maybe, or maybe knowing the pattern, we can prevent it. We can increase patrols, monitor the area more closely, put up warnings. But we can't do that based on a report about impossible rain and voices in the forest. We need facts. We need evidence that makes sense." She paused, then pushed a folder across the desk toward me. "This is the official file on the Willamette Ridge cases. David Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Chen. Accidental deaths due to exposure. Case closed. As far as the Bureau is concerned, that's the end of it." I took the folder and opened it. My report was there, but heavily redacted. Every mention of the rain anomalies, the audio recording, the symbols, the historical pattern, all of it blacked out. What remained was a bare-bones account of 3 hikers who got lost and died of hypothermia. Standard. Explainable. Closed. "However," Marks continued, "there is an unofficial file. A file that contains the complete investigation, all the evidence, all the details you documented. That file is in the archives, classified, available only to agents with specific clearance. If someone needs it in the future, say 21 years from now, they'll be able to find it." "That's it?" I asked. "We just wait for more people to die?" "No, we learn, we document. We build a record so that next time, maybe we'll understand a little more. Maybe we'll be able to stop it. But we can't do that by chasing ghosts, Agent Dalton. We have to work within the system, even when the system isn't adequate." I left her office with the official file in my hands, feeling the weight of what hadn't been said. The system would bury this like it had been buried 5 times before. The families would accept the official explanation because the truth was too strange to believe. And in 21 years, 3 more people would walk into Willamette Forest and never walk out. That was 6 years ago. I've moved on to other cases, other investigations. I don't work in Portland anymore. I've been transferred twice, most recently to Quantico, where I teach courses on criminal investigation and evidence collection. I never went back to Willamette Ridge, but I still have the unofficial file. I keep it in a locked drawer in my home office, along with the audio recording and the photographs of the symbols. And every March, I check the news from Oregon, holding my breath, waiting to see if the pattern has changed, if it's happening again ahead of schedule. 2 weeks ago, I got a call from James Holden. He's still in the Portland office, still working field investigations. He told me that in the past 6 months there have been 2 unexplained deaths in the Willamette National Forest. Both found near Deadfall Creek. Both died of hypothermia. Both completely soaked, even though no rain was recorded. "It's too early," Holden said. "We shouldn't be seeing this for another 15 years. "I know," I said. "The pattern's changing, Rebecca. Whatever's happening out there, it's accelerating." After he hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about rain that falls from clear skies, about voices calling for help that have no source, about a place in the forest where the rules are different and we don't understand why. I think about Marcus Chen's voice on that recording, saying he was cold, saying he couldn't find his way out, saying someone was calling for help, but he couldn't find them. I think about the last sound on that recording, the voice saying 3 more, in a tone that wasn't quite human. And I think about what Garrett's grandfather said, about places in the forest that belong to something else, something old, something that was here before us, and will be here long after we're gone. Tonight, it's raining outside my apartment in Virginia, normal spring rain, the kind that shows up on weather radar and makes sense. But I find myself listening to it differently now, listening for patterns, for rhythms that are too regular, for sounds buried beneath the sound of water falling. And sometimes, late at night when I'm half asleep, I hear it, that voice from the recording, not saying 3 more, but something else, something that sounds like my name, calling from somewhere far away, somewhere I can't see but can almost feel, just beyond the edge of hearing. The official report says David Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, and Marcus Chen died of exposure to unexpected weather conditions. The case is closed. The files are sealed. In 15 years, or maybe sooner, 3 more people will die in the same way, and there will be another investigation, and another report, and the cycle will continue. But I know the truth. I know that somewhere in the Oregon forest, in a clearing near an old logging camp, rain falls from clear skies and has been falling for 100 years, maybe longer. I know that voices call for help from something that is always listening but never helps. I know that the boundary between what we understand and what exists beyond our understanding is thin in that place, thin enough that sometimes things leak through. Rain from the future, voices from the past, footsteps from somewhere we don't have a name for. And I know that the rain is still falling, even now, in a place where officially it never rains at all. The last time I checked the weather for Brightwood, Oregon, it was clear skies. But I know better than to trust the forecast, because I can still hear it, even here, 2,000 miles away, the sound of rain that never was. The box arrived at the FBI Portland field office on a Tuesday morning in October 2018, delivered by a Forest Service clerk who looked relieved to be rid of it. I wasn't supposed to be the one to receive it. I'm Thomas Archer, a cold case investigator who'd been with the Bureau for 16 years, and I was actually on my way out the door when the clerk caught me in the hallway. "Agent Archer?" she said, holding out a banker's box that had seen better days. "They said you handle old evidence." This was in our storage facility. We're doing inventory and nobody knows what to do with it. The box was sealed with evidence tape that had yellowed with age. The label on top read, Ranger Station 7, Empty Hood Sector, 1988. Someone had written, audio evidence underneath in faded marker. I almost told her to take it to the evidence room to file it properly, to follow protocol. But something made me take the box instead. What's in it? I asked. She shrugged. No idea. The inventory sheet just says tape recording, witness statement. But there's no case number, no file reference. It's like it was never officially logged. We found it in a back corner, behind some old equipment. Been there since at least the 90s, maybe longer. I carried the box back to my office and set it on my desk. The tape was brittle and cracked in places, but it still held. I pulled it off carefully and opened the lid. Inside was a single cassette tape in a clear plastic case, the kind people used before everything went digital. The label on the cassette read, Ranger M. Sullivan, Sept. 12, 1987, testimony, in neat handwriting. Underneath the tape was a thin manila folder containing 3 pages of typed notes, water-stained and barely legible. I picked up the folder first. The pages were transcription notes, someone's attempt to document what was on the tape. But large sections had been crossed out, words circled, question marks scrawled in the margins. Whoever had listened to this tape had been confused, maybe disturbed. The handwriting in the margins got progressively more erratic as the pages went on. The first page started clearly enough. Interview with Forest Ranger Michael Sullivan, conducted by Agent Harrison Wade, September 12, 1987. Sullivan, responding to questions regarding the disappearance of 4 hikers in the Bull Run watershed area, August 28 to 30, 1987. Sullivan was last person to see victims alive. Then, about halfway down the page, the notes became fragmented. Subject claims he heard, illegible. Says the sounds changed at night, doesn't make sense. Check original tape. The second page was worse. Tape quality deteriorating. Multiple listens produce different, Sullivan's voice or something else. Timestamp inconsistencies. Recommend technical analysis. The third page had only 3 lines of text, written in shaky capitals. Do not listen after dark. Sounds different each time. File for review. Urgent. But there was no review date, no follow-up notation. Just those 3 lines and then blank space. At the bottom of the page, someone had written in small, precise letters, Wade deceased, 10/3/87. I sat back in my chair, holding the folder, feeling the weight of something wrong settling over me. Agent Harrison Wade. I didn't know the name, but I could look it up. A case from 1987, 4 missing hikers. A ranger's testimony that apparently disturbed the investigating agent so much he'd written warnings in the margins. And then the agent had died 3 weeks later. I should have logged the evidence properly, should have filed it, assigned it to the appropriate department, let it go through channels. But I'd been working cold cases long enough to recognize when something had been deliberately forgotten. This box had been hidden for 31 years. The tape had never been properly filed. The investigating agent had died shortly after listening to it. This wasn't bureaucratic oversight. This was burial. I pulled out the cassette and looked at it. The tape was brown with age, wound tight around the spools. There was a small crack in the plastic casing, but it looked playable. I had an old cassette player in my bottom desk drawer, a relic I'd kept from my early days with the Bureau when we still occasionally encountered analog evidence. I plugged it in, inserted the tape, and hesitated with my finger over the play button. The notes said not to listen after dark. It was 10:47 a.m., bright October morning. sunlight streaming through my office window. Safe enough. I pressed play. For the first few seconds there was just tape hiss, the familiar white noise of old analog recordings. Then a voice, male, professional, slightly tinny through the old speakers. "This is Special Agent Harrison Wade, FBI Portland Field Office. Date is September 12, 1987. Time is 2:15 p.m. I'm conducting an interview with Forest Ranger Michael Sullivan regarding case number," a pause, shuffling papers, "regarding the disappearances at Bull Run Watershed. Ranger Sullivan, please state your name and position for the record." Another voice, younger, nervous. "Michael Sullivan. I'm a forest ranger, been working the Mant Hood sector for 3 years. Station 7, up near Bull Run." "Thank you. Ranger Sullivan, you filed a report on August 30th stating that you had contact with 4 hikers." More paper sounds. "David and Linda Brennan, ages 34 and 32, and Scott and Jennifer Morrison, ages 29 and 27, is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "Can you describe that contact?" A pause. When Sullivan spoke again, his voice was quieter. "They came through the checkpoint at Station 7 on August 28th, around 4 p.m. It's standard procedure. We log hikers going into the watershed area, make sure they have proper permits, give them safety information." "And did they have proper permits?" "Yes, everything was in order. They said they were planning a 3-day backpacking trip, would be camping near Fraser Creek the first night, then hiking north toward Lost Lake. Expected to exit at the Highway 26 trailhead on August 31st. You saw them again after that initial contact?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yes. They came back to the station on the 29th, late afternoon, around 5:30 or 6 p.m. "Why did they come back?" "They said," Sullivan's voice dropped even lower, "they said something was wrong with the forest." I leaned closer to the cassette player. In the background of the recording, I could hear faint office sounds, phones ringing, people talking, the normal ambient noise of a busy workplace. But there was something else, too, a low hum that seemed to pulse underneath the conversation. "Wrong how?" Agent Wade asked. They couldn't explain it clearly. David Brennan did most of the talking. He said they'd set up camp at Fraser Creek like planned. Everything was fine at first. But when it got dark, the forest went completely silent. No animals, no insects, nothing. Just silence. And then they started hearing sounds. "What kind of sounds?" "Footsteps, someone walking around their camp, circling them. But when they used their flashlights, there was nobody there. This went on for hours. They said every time they heard the footsteps, the circle got smaller, closer. By dawn, they packed up and came straight back to the station." "Did you believe them?" A long silence. I could hear Sullivan breathing, hear him shifting in his chair. I didn't know what to believe. They seemed genuinely scared. These weren't kids, Agent Wade. David Brennan was an experienced outdoorsman. He'd been hiking these mountains for years. If he said something was wrong, I had to take it seriously. "What did you do?" I tried to convince them to just go home, get out of the forest. But they'd driven up from California, taken time off work for this trip. Brennan said they probably just spooked themselves, camping alone in the dark. He wanted to try again, maybe in a different location, somewhere more open. "And you let them go back?" Sullivan's voice cracked slightly. I gave them a map, showed them some alternative camping spots further west, away from the deep forest. Told them to check in with me in the morning, and if I didn't hear from them by noon on the 31st, I'd send search and rescue. That was the last time I saw them. The recording continued, Wade asking standard questions about the search efforts, the timeline, physical descriptions of the hikers. But I was stuck on what Sullivan had said about the sounds. Footsteps circling, getting closer. I'd read hundreds of missing persons reports over my career. People got lost, they panicked, they made bad decisions. But experienced hikers didn't usually abandon a campsite because of sounds in the dark. The tape ran for another 10 minutes, Wade wrapping up the formal interview, Sullivan providing contact information for follow-up. Then Wade's voice. "Thank you, Ranger Sullivan. That concludes our interview at 2:47 p.m. I'm terminating the recording should have ended there, but it didn't. There was a click, a brief silence, and then the tape started again. But it was different now. The office sounds were gone. Wade's voice, when he spoke, sounded distant, hollow. Personal notes, September 12th, 10:30 p.m. I'm at my apartment listening to the Sullivan interview again. There's something on this tape, something I didn't hear during the live interview. It's faint, but it's there, underneath Sullivan's voice. It sounds like a pause. In the background, I could hear something that might have been wind, or static, or something else. A rhythmic sound, barely audible. It sounds like footsteps, Wade continued, but that's not possible. We were in a closed interview room, just me and Sullivan, nobody else. Another pause. The background sound grew slightly louder. It did sound like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I'm going to try enhancing the audio, see if I can isolate. Wade's voice cut off abruptly. There was a crash, like the microphone had been dropped. Then nothing but that sound, those impossible footsteps, growing louder and louder until they overwhelmed everything else. The tape ended with a sharp click. I sat in my office, staring at the cassette player, my heart beating faster than it should have been. The sunlight through my window suddenly felt inadequate, the shadows in the corners of my room too deep. I rewound the tape and listened to the ending again. The footsteps were there, undeniable, getting louder as if whatever was making them was approaching the microphone, approaching Wade. I pulled up the FBI personnel database and searched for Harrison Wade. His file photo showed a man in his early 40s, serious expression, 20 years of service. The notation at the bottom of his file was brief. Deceased 10/3/87. Cause, cardiac arrest. Off-duty death, no investigation required. 21 days after he recorded those personal notes. 21 days after he heard footsteps on a tape that shouldn't have contained any. I picked up the phone and called the Forest Service office. It took 3 transfers before I got someone who'd been working there long enough to remember 1987. Station 7, the woman said. That's been closed since the early 90s. Budget cuts. The building's still there, but we don't staff it anymore. What about Ranger Michael Sullivan? Is he still with the Forest Service? A pause. Sullivan retired in 1989. Took early retirement, actually. Medical reasons. Medical reasons? I wasn't here then, but I've seen the file. He had some kind of breakdown. Wouldn't work at night shifts anymore, said he couldn't sleep, kept hearing things. They pensioned him out. I think he moved to eastern Oregon, somewhere far from the forests. I thanked her and hung up. Michael Sullivan, terrified into early retirement. Harrison Wade, dead at 43 from a heart attack. 4 hikers who walked into the woods and never came out. And a tape that contained sounds that shouldn't exist. I should have stopped there. Should have logged the evidence, written a brief memo, let it disappear back into storage where it had been hiding for 3 decades. But I'd spent 16 years chasing ghosts through cold case files, looking for answers in cases that everyone else had given up on. This tape was another ghost, another unsolved mystery that had been deliberately forgotten. I wasn't going to let it stay forgotten. That evening, I stayed late at the office. The building emptied out slowly, agents heading home to their families, support staff logging off their computers, cleaning crews making their rounds. By 8 p.m., the 5th floor, where my office was located, was dark except for my desk lamp and the glow of my computer screen. I'd spent the afternoon researching the Bull Run watershed disappearances. The official file was thin. 4 hikers reported missing August 31st. Search conducted September 7th. No bodies found. No evidence recovered. Case closed as presumed accidental death due to exposure or fall. There was no mention of Ranger Sullivan's statement about the hikers returning scared. No mention of footsteps or circling sounds. The investigation had been cursory at best, and the file was marked closed less than 2 weeks after the hikers disappeared. But I found something else in my research. The Bull Run watershed had a history, not just of disappearances, though there were plenty of those over the decades, but of strangeness. Reports going back to the 1950s of hikers hearing things in the forest, seeing things that didn't make sense. Most of it had been dismissed as urban legend, campfire stories, the kind of folklore that grows up around any sufficiently remote wilderness area. But there was a pattern. The reports always described the same thing: complete silence falling over the forest, followed by sounds of something moving, something circling. And people who reported these experiences always left the area quickly, and many of them never went back into the deep woods again. I was reading through a 1973 incident report when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway outside my office. I looked at the clock. 9:47 p.m. The cleaning crew had finished their rounds an hour ago. I was supposed to be alone on this floor. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I stood up, my hand instinctively moving to the service weapon on my hip. "This is FBI Agent Archer. Identify yourself." No answer. The footsteps resumed, moving past my door, continuing down the hallway toward the stairwell. I opened my door and looked out. The hallway was empty, fluorescent lights humming, gray carpet stretching away in both directions. Nobody there. But I could still hear the footsteps, fainter now, descending the stairs. I stepped into the hallway and walked to the stairwell door, pushed it open and looked down. The stairwell was empty, the automatic lights clicking on as I moved. The sound had stopped. I went back to my office, closing and locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking slightly. I'd been alone in the office late at night dozens of times over the years. I'd never been bothered by it. But something about those footsteps, the deliberate pace, the way they'd stopped right outside my door, had gotten under my skin. I looked at the cassette tape sitting on my desk. The notes had said not to listen after dark. That sound's changed each time. I'd listened to it once at 10:47 a.m. It was now almost 10 p.m. I should have left, should have gone home, come back tomorrow, approach this in daylight like a rational investigator. Instead, I picked up the cassette, rewound it to the end where Wade's personal notes began, and pressed play. Wade's voice, hollow and distant. Personal notes. September 12th, 10:30 p.m. But something was different. His voice sounded more strained than it had this morning, more afraid. Or was I imagining it? Was I hearing what I expected to hear because of what the notes had warned? I'm at my apartment, listening to the Sullivan interview again. There's something on this tape. The background sound was louder now. Not just footsteps, but something else. A low sound, almost like breathing, rhythmic and deep. It sounds like footsteps, but that's not possible. And then I heard something I hadn't heard this morning. Between Wade's words, in the pauses, there was a voice. Faint, barely audible, but definitely there. It was saying something, a single word repeated over and over. "Listen." Wade's voice continued. "I'm going to try enhancing the audio." And that other voice underneath. "Listen. Listen. Listen." The crash came, the microphone dropping, and then the footsteps overwhelmed everything else. But now I could hear that they weren't alone. There were voices mixed in with them, multiple voices, all whispering the same word. Listen. The tape ended. I sat in my office, the only sound my own ragged breathing, and I understood what the notes had meant. The tape did sound different at night, or maybe it sounded different each time you listened. Or maybe my mind was just filling in gaps, creating patterns where none existed. I needed to be rational about this. I needed to approach it scientifically. But my hands were still shaking, and when I looked at the windows of my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just outside, in the darkness, looking in. I rewound the tape and played it again, and this time the voices were clearer, and they weren't just saying, "Listen," anymore. They were saying other things, things I couldn't quite make out, words that seemed to shift and change even as I heard them. I played it a third time. The words were even clearer now. They were saying names. 4 names, over and over. David, Linda, Scott, Jennifer. The 4 hikers who disappeared in 1987. I stopped the tape, ejected the cassette, and sat there staring at it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to throw the thing away, to destroy it, to get it as far from me as possible. But I was an investigator. This was evidence. And somewhere in this tape, buried under 31 years of time and static and whatever impossible thing was happening to it, there might be answers. I put the tape back in its case, put the case back in the box, and sealed the box with new evidence tape. Then I carried it down to the evidence room and locked it in my personal storage locker, where it would be secure and where I could access it whenever I needed. But as I was leaving the building, walking through the dark parking garage to my car, I heard them again. Those footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing off the concrete walls, and underneath them, barely audible, that whisper. Listen. I drove home through empty Portland streets, checking my rearview mirror more often than I needed to, unable to shake the feeling that something was following me, something that had been waiting 31 years for someone to listen to that tape again. When I got home, I double-checked all my locks, closed all my curtains, and sat in my living room with the lights on, telling myself I was being irrational. It was just a tape, just an old recording with some audio artifacts that my brain was interpreting as voices. There was a logical explanation for all of it, but I didn't believe that. And when I finally went to bed around 2 a.m., I lay awake in the dark, listening to the sounds of my apartment. The refrigerator humming, the building settling, the occasional car passing outside, and trying not to hear other sounds underneath them. Sounds like footsteps. Sounds like breathing. Sounds like someone whispering my name. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something. A creak from the hallway, a scratch at the window, something that sounded like footsteps circling my bedroom. And I'd snap awake, heart racing. By the time dawn broke and gray light filtered through my curtains, I'd convinced myself I was being irrational. It was just an old tape. Audio artifacts. Suggestion and exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But I couldn't stop thinking about those names. David, Linda, Scott, Jennifer. At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went into the office early. The building was almost empty, just security and a few workaholics getting a jump on the day. I went straight to my locker in the evidence room and retrieved the box. The tape sat inside, innocuous, just a brown cassette in a clear plastic case. In the fluorescent lights of the evidence room, it seemed impossible that I'd heard what I thought I'd heard last night. I needed to approach this methodically. I was an investigator, trained to analyze evidence without letting emotion or superstition cloud my judgment. The first step was to find out more about the original case. The official file had been thin, but there had to be more. Reports from the search teams, statements from the families, perhaps even news coverage from 1987. I spent the morning in the archives, pulling boxes of old case files from the late 80s. The filing system from that era was chaotic at best, but eventually I found what I was looking for. A larger file on the Bull Run disappearances, stored separately from the main case file, marked Supplementary Materials. Inside were search and rescue reports, maps marked with grid coordinates, and a thick stack of witness statements from other hikers who'd been in the area around the same time. I spread everything out on a table in the archive room and started reading. The search had been extensive, more than the official file had suggested. Over 40 people had participated, covering an area of roughly 30 square miles. They'd searched for a week, using dogs, helicopters, even infrared equipment, and they'd found nothing. No campsite, no abandoned gear, no bodies. It was as if David and Linda Brennan and Scott and Jennifer Morrison had simply vanished. But the witness statements were interesting. Several hikers reported strange experiences in the Bull Run area in late August 1987. One couple said they'd left their campsite 2 days early because they kept hearing sounds at night. Footsteps, branches breaking, something moving around them in the dark. Another solo hiker reported that the forest had gone completely silent for hours, so quiet it made his ears ring. A group of 3 college students said they'd seen lights moving through the trees late at night, like flashlights, but when they investigated they found nothing. One statement caught my attention. A man named Gregory Marsh had been camping about 5 miles from where the 4 hikers had last been seen. His statement was dated September 3, 1987, and it was marked, "Referred to Agent Wade for follow-up." But there was no follow-up report attached. Marsh's statement read, "On the night of August 29th, approximately 11 p.m., I was awakened by a sound I initially thought was rain. Heavy rain, like a downpour hitting my tent. But when I opened the tent flap to check, the sky was clear and the ground was dry. The sound continued for several minutes, then stopped abruptly. After that, the forest was completely silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. Around midnight, I heard voices, multiple voices, talking in what sounded like normal conversation, maybe 50 yards from my camp. I called out, asking if anyone needed help, but the voices stopped immediately. Then I heard footsteps, many footsteps moving away from my position. I turned on my flashlight and searched the area, but I found no one. No footprints, no evidence anyone had been there. I packed up my camp and hiked out in the dark. I've been camping in these mountains for 15 years, and I've never been scared before. But that night I was terrified. Something was in those woods, and it wasn't human. I read the statement 3 times, my pulse quickening with each reading. The sound like rain, the voices, the footsteps. It matched what Sullivan had said about the 4 hikers' experience, and it matched what I'd heard on the tape. I looked up Gregory Marsh in our database. He was still alive, living in Salem, about an hour south of Portland. I noted his contact information and kept reading through the files. Toward the bottom of the stack, I found something else. A memo from Agent Wade, dated September 15th, 1907, 3 days after he'd interviewed Sullivan. It was addressed to his supervisor, requesting permission to reopen the Bull Run case based on new evidence. But the request had been denied. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Insufficient grounds. Case remains closed. Focus on active investigations." Wade hadn't let it drop, though. Clipped to the back of the memo was a personal note, written on a legal pad in Wade's handwriting. They're not telling me everything. Sullivan knows more than he said in the official interview. The tape, there's something on the tape that wasn't there during the actual conversation. I can hear it now, clearer each time I listen. Voices. Names. The forest is trying to tell us something, but nobody wants to hear it. I'm going to Bull Run myself. If I can find the area where the hikers disappeared, maybe I can make sense of this. Maybe I can hear it clearly. The note was dated September 20th, 1987. Wade had died on October 3rd, 13 days later. I pulled Wade's personnel file and read through it carefully. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but there was an incident report from the Portland police attached to the file. Officers had responded to a wellness check at Wade's apartment after he failed to show up for work for 2 days. They found him in his living room, dead for approximately 36 hours. The autopsy showed massive heart failure, no signs of trauma or foul play. But there was one detail that struck me as odd. The responding officers noted that Wade's apartment was in disarray, furniture moved, papers scattered everywhere. And every mirror in the apartment, bathroom, bedroom, the large mirror in the hallway, had been covered with blankets and towels. When asked about this, Wade's ex-wife, they'd been divorced for 3 years, said it was completely out of character. Wade had been methodical, organized, almost obsessively neat. The report also noted that a cassette player was found near Wade's body, still plugged in, a tape inside. The tape was listed in the inventory of Wade's personal effects, returned to the FBI evidence room. Case number, I checked the number, matched the tape now sitting in my locker. Wade had been listening to the tape when he died. I sat in the archive room, surrounded by boxes of old files, and felt a cold certainty settling over me. Wade had heard what I heard. He'd heard the voices getting clearer, the names, the warnings, and he'd gone to Bull Run to investigate, despite being told to drop the case. And then he'd come home and listened to the tape again, and something had happened. Something that made him cover every mirror in his apartment. Something that stopped his heart. I should have destroyed the tape right then, burned it, shredded it, erased it. Instead, I kept investigating. By early afternoon, I'd compiled a list of everyone connected to the case who was still alive. Michael Sullivan, the ranger, living somewhere in eastern Oregon. Gregory Marsh, the witness, in Salem, and a few family members of the missing hikers, scattered across California and Washington. I decided to start with Marsh. He'd been in the forest that night. He'd heard what the hikers had heard, and he'd been terrified enough to hike out in the dark and never go back. I called the number on file for him. A man answered on the 3rd ring, voice cautious. "Hello? Mr. Marsh? My name is Thomas Archer. I'm with the FBI. I'm investigating a cold case from 1987, and I found a statement you gave regarding some unusual experiences in the Bull Run watershed area." A long silence, then, I knew someone would call eventually. I've been waiting 30 years for this. Waiting? For someone to listen, to take it seriously. Can you come to Salem? This isn't something I want to discuss over the phone. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Gregory Marsh's living room, a modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Marsh was in his 60s now, gray-haired but fit, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent a lot of time outdoors. But there was something else in his eyes. Wariness. Maybe fear. "I haven't been back to Bull Run since that night," he said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Haven't been to any forest at night since then, actually. I sold all my camping gear. My wife thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am." "Tell me what happened." He sat down across from me and stared into his coffee mug for a long moment before speaking. I'd been solo camping for years. Loved it. The solitude, the connection to nature, all that. Bull Run was one of my favorite spots. Remote, beautiful, peaceful. Or at least it used to be. That trip in August '87, I'd been there 3 days already. Everything was normal the first 2 nights. But the 3rd night, the 29th, everything changed. It started with that sound, like rain hitting my tent. But there was no rain. And it wasn't just the sound. I could feel it, like pressure on the tent fabric, like something was pressing down on it. How long did it last? Maybe 5 minutes. Then it stopped, and the silence. God, the silence was worse than the sound. It was absolute, complete, like the forest had just stopped existing. And then I heard the voices. What did they say? Marsh looked at me directly for the first time. They said names, 4 names, over and over. David, Linda, Scott, Jennifer. I didn't know who they were at the time. It wasn't until later, when I heard about the missing hikers, that I realized those were their names. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. You heard their names? On August 29th? Yes. And here's the thing. The hikers didn't go missing until the 30th or 31st, right? So how could I have heard their names before they disappeared? Maybe you heard about them later and incorporated it into your memory of that night. He shook his head firmly. I thought about that. Spent years thinking about it, actually, but no. I wrote down what I heard that night in my journal, dated it, before I ever knew anyone was missing. I still have the journal. Do you want to see it? He left the room and came back with an old spiral notebook, pages yellowed and dog-eared. He flipped to an entry dated August 30th, 1987, written in shaky handwriting. Left Bull Run at 2 a.m., couldn't stay. Heard voices saying names, David, Linda, Scott, Jennifer. Heard footsteps circling. Heard something else. Something I can't describe, like the forest itself was speaking. Never going back. I wrote that hours before the missing persons report was even filed. Marcia said quietly. How did I know their names, Agent Archer? I didn't have an answer. We sat in silence for a moment, then I asked, did you ever speak with Agent Wade, the FBI agent who was investigating the case? Once, he came to see me about 2 weeks after I gave my statement. He seemed intense, obsessed, maybe. He kept asking if I'd heard anything else, seen anything else. He played me a tape recording of an interview he'd done with some ranger, asked me if I heard anything unusual on the tape. Did you? Oh yeah, I heard it. Voices underneath the conversation, saying those names again, David, Linda, Scott, Jennifer. Wade seemed relieved that I could hear them too, like he'd been worried he was going crazy. He said the voices got clearer every time he listened to the tape. That's why he came to see me, to confirm he wasn't imagining it. What else did he say? He said he was going back to Bull Run. Said there was something in that forest that wanted to be heard, and he was going to figure out what it was. He asked if I'd go with him, but I refused. Told him no amount of money would get me back into those woods. He went anyway. Alone, I think. He died a few weeks later. Marsh nodded slowly. I heard about that. Heart attack, right? I never believed that. Wade was maybe 45, fit, healthy. Hearts don't just stop for no reason. Did he tell you anything else? About what he thought was in the forest? He had a theory. Said there were places in the world where the boundary between things was thin. Between past and present. Between alive and dead. Between here and somewhere else. He said he thought Bull Run was one of those places. That the forest was trying to tell us something, show us something, but we didn't know how to listen properly. And the tape? Did he say why the voices got clearer each time he listened? Marsh leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. He said it was like tuning a radio. The more you listened, the better you got at hearing the right frequency. But there was a cost. He said every time he listened, he felt like something was listening back, like he was opening a door that should stay closed. After I left Marsh's house, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about doors that should stay closed. The tape was in my evidence locker. I could leave it there, forget about it, let it disappear back into the archives where it had been hiding for 30 years. Nobody would blame me. Nobody would even know. But 4 people had died in that forest. Their bodies had never been found. Their families had never gotten closure. And somewhere in that tape, hidden under layers of static and time and impossibility, there might be answers. I drove back to Portland as the sun was setting, the sky turning orange and purple over the Cascade Mountains. By the time I reached the office, it was dark, and the building was mostly empty again. I went straight to my locker, retrieved the tape, and brought it back to my office. The notes had said not to listen after dark. Marsh had said the voices got clearer each time. Wade had said something was listening back. I knew what I was about to do was stupid. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stop. But I inserted the tape into the player, rewound it to Wade's personal notes, and pressed play. The tape hissed to life. Wade's voice, hollow and frightened. Personal notes. September 12th, 10:30 p.m. But this time his voice wasn't alone. There was another voice speaking at the same time, saying different words, an overlapping conversation with itself. They're in the forest. They're still in the forest. They never left. They're calling. They want someone to find them. They want someone to listen. The voices continued. 2 Wades speaking simultaneously, one conducting his investigation, the other describing something he couldn't possibly know. The background sounds were clearer now. Not just footsteps, but breathing, whispers, the rustle of branches and wind that shouldn't exist on an audio tape. And then, as Wade described trying to enhance the audio, I heard my name. Archer. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. My name, spoken by a voice that wasn't Wade's, wasn't Sullivan's, wasn't anything human. Archer, listen. Come to the forest. Come find us. I stopped the tape, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the player. The office felt wrong suddenly. The shadows too deep, the air too cold. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, and underneath it, that other sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. I stood up, weapon in hand, and opened my door. The hallway was empty, fluorescent lights buzzing, but I could still hear them. The footsteps were coming from everywhere at once, from above, from below, from inside the walls themselves. I went back into my office and locked the door, grabbed my phone, and called the security desk downstairs. This is Agent Archer, 5th floor. Are there any other people on this floor right now? Negative, Agent Archer. You're the only one signed in on 5. Can you check the cameras? I need to know if anyone's in the hallway. A pause. Checking now. Cameras on 5 are... That's odd. What? They're showing static, all of them. Like the feeds are corrupted or something. Let me try rebooting the system. I hung up and looked at the tape player. The cassette was still inside, motionless, but I could swear I heard something coming from it. Not the hiss of tape, but whispers. Many whispers, all talking at once, all saying my name. My computer screen flickered. The overhead lights dimmed for a moment, then brightened, and on my desk, next to the tape player, my phone screen lit up even though no one was calling. The screen showed a text message, but it was from my own number, which was impossible. The message read, Station 7. Tomorrow, alone. I stared at the screen until it went dark again. Then I ejected the tape, put it back in the box, and sealed the box in my locker. I left the office, rode the elevator down to the parking garage, and drove home through streets that seemed unusually empty for a Tuesday night. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the sounds of my apartment, trying to convince myself I was being rational, that there was a logical explanation for everything. But I couldn't stop thinking about Wade's theory. Thin places, boundaries between here and somewhere else, and the tape as a door, opening wider every time someone listened. When I finally fell asleep sometime after 3 a.m., I dreamed of a forest where it was always night, where footsteps circled endlessly through the trees, and where 4 voices called out names over and over, waiting for someone to answer, waiting for someone to find them. I didn't go to Station 7 the next day. I told myself it was because the message had been a hallucination, stress-induced paranoia, my phone malfunctioning. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Instead, I spent Wednesday doing what I should have done from the beginning, documenting everything. I wrote a detailed report on the tape, on Wade's death, on the disappearances. I noted the audio anomalies, the witness statements, the pattern of fear that seemed to follow anyone who got too close to understanding what happened in Bull Run that August. I even contacted the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit asking if they'd ever encountered cases where audio evidence seemed to change or degrade in unusual ways. The analyst I spoke with, a woman named Dr. Christine Reeves, was intrigued. There are documented cases of mass hysteria surrounding certain audio or visual stimuli, she said. The human brain is incredibly good at pattern recognition, sometimes too good. We see faces in clouds, hear voices in white noise. If multiple people listen to a recording expecting to hear something specific, they often will. What if they don't know what to expect? What if they all hear the same thing independently? That's more interesting. Could be genuine evidence of something on the recording. Or could be that the human brain is predisposed to hear certain patterns, voices, footsteps, things that sound human, even when they're not there. What about recordings that sound different each time you listen? A pause. That's not psychologically typical. That sounds more like either the recording media itself is degrading in real time, or you're experiencing a dissociative episode that's affecting your perception. What if it's neither? Another pause, longer this time. Agent Archer, are you okay? Do you need to talk to someone? I thanked her and hung up. She thought I was losing it. Maybe I was. Maybe the stress of 16 years chasing cold cases had finally caught up with me, and I was having some kind of breakdown. That would be the rational explanation. But I knew what I'd heard, and I knew what Wade had heard. And I knew that the message on my phone, telling me to go to Station 7, was still there when I checked. Not a hallucination. Real. Thursday morning, I made a decision. I was going to Station 7, but I wasn't going alone, and I wasn't going unprepared. I called an agent I'd worked with before, Daniel Marks, someone I trusted. I told him I was investigating a cold case and needed backup to interview a potential witness at an old ranger station in the Mad Hood area. I didn't mention the tape, didn't mention Wade or the voices or any of it. Just framed it as standard field work. We drove out Thursday afternoon, taking Highway 26 east into the mountains. Station 7 was about an hour from Portland, deep in the Mad Hood National Forest. According to the GPS, we'd need to hike the last mile. The old access road had been closed for years. "What's this case about?" Marks asked, as we drove through increasingly dense forest. "Missing persons from 1987. 4 hikers never found. There was a ranger who might have information." "That ranger still around?" "He retired, lives in Eastern Oregon now. But I want to see the station where he worked, where the hikers last checked in. Sometimes you can learn more from a location than from witnesses." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. The truth was that something had told me to come here, and I needed to know why. We parked at the trailhead around 3 p.m. The forest was quiet, but not the heavy, waiting silence that witnesses had described. Just normal quiet. Birds calling, wind rustling through the Douglas firs. We hiked in, following an overgrown dirt road that wound through the trees. Station 7 appeared after about 45 minutes of walking. It was a small wooden building, maybe 20 feet square, with a sagging porch, and boarded-up windows. The roof had holes in it, and moss covered most of the walls. A faded Forest Service sign hung crookedly next to the door. "Place has been abandoned for a while," Marks observed. We approached carefully. The door was locked, but the wood was rotten enough that it gave way with minimal force. Inside was a single room, empty except for a few pieces of broken furniture and a thick layer of dust and debris. A desk sat against one wall, drawers hanging open. An old bulletin board on the opposite wall still had a few papers pinned to it, yellowed and water-damaged. "Not much here," Marks said, looking around. "What exactly are we looking for?" "I'm not sure. Logs, records, anything that might tell us more about what the hikers reported before they disappeared." We searched the building methodically. Most of the paperwork was ruined, ink faded, or paper dissolved into pulp. But in one of the desk drawers, sealed in a plastic bag that had protected it from moisture, I found a small spiral notebook. Inside, written in neat handwriting, were daily logs from 1987. I flipped to late August and found entries for the 28th, 29th, and 30th. Aug 28, 4 hikers checked in. Brennan party. Permits valid. Headed to Fraser Creek area. Aug 29. Brennan party returned. Reported unusual sounds during night. Appeared genuinely distressed. Advised alternative camping location. Party departed 6:30 p.m. Aug 30. No contact from Brennan party. Will monitor. Aug 1. Brennan party failed to check out. Notified district office, search initiated. And then, at the bottom of the August 31st entry, written in different ink, shakier handwriting. "I hear them at night now, the footsteps. They circle the station. I keep the radio on all night so I don't have to hear them, but sometimes I still do. Sometimes they say my name." I showed the entry to Marks. Sullivan was scared, staying in this station alone after what happened. Can you blame him? 4 people vanished from the area he's supposed to be monitoring. That would freak anyone out. It's more than that. Look at the rest of the entries. I flipped through September. The handwriting got progressively worse, the entries shorter and more disjointed. Sept 3, heard them again. Closer this time. Sept 7, search called off. They're still out there, I know they are. Sept 12. Agent came to interview me. Couldn't tell him everything. Couldn't tell him I hear them calling. He wouldn't believe me. Sept 15. Can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see the forest. See them walking in circles, lost, looking for the way out. The last entry was dated September 18, 1987. I'm leaving. Can't stay here anymore. The station belongs to them now. At night, the walls shake with footsteps. The radio picks up voices even when it's turned off. Last night, I saw them outside, walking around the building in the dark. I couldn't see their faces. I don't want to see their faces. I'm requesting transfer tomorrow. If they don't approve it, I'm quitting. I can't be here anymore. The forest is wrong. Jesus, Marks muttered. Guy had a breakdown. Or something drove him to one. We continued searching the station. In a metal filing cabinet that had survived the years better than the wooden furniture, I found more documents. Old incident reports, maintenance logs, and, tucked in the back of one drawer, a cassette tape. My hands started shaking when I saw it. The label read, Station 7, Personal Log, M. Sullivan. What is it? Marks asked. Another tape, Sullivan's personal recordings. Is it relevant to the case? I thought about Wade's tape, about the voices that got clearer each time you listened, about the message on my phone telling me to come here. It might be. I slipped the tape into my jacket pocket. We searched for another hour, but found nothing else of significance. As the sun started to set and shadows lengthened across the forest floor, Marks suggested we head back. "I don't want to be hiking out of here in the dark," he said. Neither did I. We left the station and started back down the trail. But as we walked, I became aware of something wrong. The forest had gone quiet, not gradually, suddenly, like a switch had been flipped. The birds stopped singing. The wind stopped moving through the trees. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, absorbed by the stillness. "You notice that?" Marks asked quietly. "Yeah, let's pick up the pace." We walked faster, but the trail seemed longer than it had on the way in. The trees looked the same, but subtly wrong, like we were walking through a photograph of the forest rather than the forest itself. And underneath the silence, I started to hear something else. Soft, rhythmic, footsteps. "Someone's behind us," Marks said, hand moving to his weapon. I looked back. The trail was empty, but I could hear them clearly now. Multiple sets of footsteps, keeping pace with us, maintaining a constant distance. We started jogging. The footsteps matched our speed. "This isn't right," Mark said. "Something's not right." We ran. The trail twisted through the trees, shadows growing deeper as the sun sank toward the horizon. And all around us, those footsteps, circling, closing in, driven by something that had no face, no form, just a presence in the woods that had been waiting 31 years for someone to return. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. The screen flickered, showing that same message again. "Listen." We burst out of the tree line and saw my car in the parking lot, maybe 100 yards away. Safety. We sprinted for it, and the footsteps behind us accelerated, no longer matching our pace but actively pursuing. I fumbled with my keys, got the door open, and we threw ourselves inside. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, tires kicking up gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw the trailhead, the trees, the gathering darkness, and I saw figures standing at the edge of the forest. 4 of them, motionless, watching us drive away. Neither Marks nor I spoke during the drive back to Portland. What was there to say? We'd both heard the footsteps. We'd both run. And we'd both seen those figures, though neither of us wanted to acknowledge it. When I dropped Marks off at his apartment, he finally broke the silence. "Whatever that was, I don't want to know. I don't want to investigate it, don't want to understand it. I'm going to pretend it didn't happen. Marks, no. Whatever you're investigating, Archer, leave it alone. Some things aren't meant to be understood. Some doors shouldn't be opened." He got out of the car and walked away without looking back. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with Sullivan's tape in front of me. I knew I shouldn't listen to it. I knew every time I listened to one of these tapes, something changed. Something opened a little wider. But I was too far in now. I needed to know. I put the tape in my player and pressed play. Sullivan's voice, younger than the man in Wade's interview, nervous but trying to sound professional. Personal log, Michael Sullivan, July 15, 1987. First week at Station 7. Everything's going well. Beautiful area, peaceful, good posting. The log continued. Sullivan documenting his daily activities, checking in hikers, maintaining the station. Nothing unusual until August 29th. Personal log, August 29th. Something strange happened today. The Brennan party came back, said they heard things in the night. They were scared, genuinely scared. I tried to convince them to leave the forest entirely, but they insisted on trying a different location. I gave them a map, showed them some spots further west. God, I hope they're okay. August 31st. They didn't check out. I called it in. Search teams are coming tomorrow. I don't think they're going to find them. I heard it last night, what the Brennans heard. Footsteps around the station, circling, getting closer. And voices. They were calling names: David, Linda, Scott, Jennifer. But those are the Brennans' names. How could I hear their names before I knew they were missing? September 2nd. The searches aren't finding anything. It's like they vanished. But I know where they are. They're still in the forest. I can hear them at night. They're walking in circles, lost, calling out. They can't find the way out. September 7th. I'm not sleeping anymore. Can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see them walking through the trees, going in circles, forever and ever. The forest has them. It won't let them go. And then, the tape changed. Sullivan's voice became distant, hollow, speaking over itself like Wade's tape had. They told me something. The voices told me. This has happened before, happens every 21 years. The forest takes people, not many, just enough. Just the ones who listen too closely, who hear what they shouldn't hear. And once it has them, it keeps them. They walk forever in the dark, lost, calling out, hoping someone will find them. But no one ever does, because the forest hides them, makes them invisible, makes them impossible to find. And the tapes, Sullivan's voice continued, now barely more than a whisper. The tapes are how it spreads, how it reaches beyond the forest. Everyone who listens becomes part of it. Everyone who hears the voices opens the door a little wider, until eventually they come all the way through. The tape ended with a sound like wind through trees, or breathing, or something I didn't have a word for. I sat in my kitchen, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, and I finally understood what Wade had understood, what Sullivan had understood, what drove one man to cover his mirrors and stop his heart, and the other to flee into the desert and never come back. The tape wasn't evidence. It was an invitation. And every time I listened, every time I heard those voices more clearly, I was accepting it. I was opening the door. I was letting them through. I ejected the tape and held it in my hands, feeling its weight, its potential. I should destroy it. Both tapes. Burn them, melt them, erase them from existence. But even as I thought it, I knew I wouldn't. Because there were still questions. There were still 4 people lost in that forest, walking in circles for 31 years, waiting for someone to find them. And because something was listening. Something was speaking through the tapes, leaving messages on my phone, calling my name in empty hallways. It wanted me to know. It wanted me to understand. I just wasn't sure I wanted to know what would happen when I finally did. I stopped going to work after that, called in sick, said I had the flu, needed a few days. My supervisor was understanding. I rarely took sick leave, had accrued weeks of it over the years. But the truth was I couldn't be in that office anymore. Couldn't walk those hallways where I heard footsteps that shouldn't exist. Couldn't sit at my desk knowing that evidence locker was just a few floors below with those tapes waiting. Instead, I sat in my apartment and did what I did best. I investigated. But this time, I was investigating something that didn't fit in evidence bags or court testimony. I was investigating the space between things, the thin places where Wade said the boundaries broke down. I found references going back over 100 years. Stories from loggers and trappers and native peoples about areas in the Cascade forests where people disappeared. Not many, just a few every generation. And always the same pattern. Experienced outdoors people vanishing without a trace. Searches finding nothing. And then the stories that would circulate among the survivors. Stories about sounds in the forest. Footsteps circling. Voices calling names. One account from 1923 described it perfectly. A logger named Samuel Grant had written in his journal about 3 men who went missing from his camp. The entry, which I found digitized in a university archive, read, "The forest has taken them, as it takes all who listen too closely to its voice. They walked into the trees one morning and never came back. We searched for weeks but found only their boot prints, going in circles, round and round the same area, as if they were trapped in some invisible maze. And at night, when the camp was quiet, we could hear them calling. Their voices carried on the wind, saying our names, asking us to help, begging us to find them. But we never could. The forest keeps what it takes. Grant's camp was less than 5 miles from Station 7. The more I dug, the more I found. Reports from the 1940s, the 1960s, the 1980s, always in the same general area, always the same pattern. And in several cases, the investigating officers had noted audio recordings that seemed to contain anomalous sounds. Most of these recordings had been lost or destroyed over the years, but a few remained, scattered across various archives, forgotten. On Friday, 3 days after visiting Station 7, I drove to the Oregon Historical Society and asked to access their audio archive. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Pemberton, led me to a climate-controlled room where old recordings were stored. "What time period are you interested in?" she asked. "Late 1960s. Police or Forest Service recordings from the Mount Hood area." She pulled several boxes and left me alone in the listening room. I went through them methodically, and in the third box I found what I was looking for. A reel-to-reel tape labeled Forest Service Incident Report, Missing Persons, October 1966. I threaded the tape onto the player and put on headphones. The recording was scratchy, the voices tinny and distant, but I could make out a conversation between a Forest Service officer and a ranger named Thomas Blake. "Ranger Blake, describe what you heard on the night of October 14th. "I was doing a late patrol near Zigzag Canyon when I heard voices, multiple voices, sounded like they were calling for help. I investigated but couldn't find anyone. The voices seemed to move, staying always ahead of me, leading me deeper into the forest." "How long did this continue?" "About 2 hours. Eventually I realized I was lost. I'd been walking in circles. The voices had led me in a pattern, and I couldn't find my way back to the trail. I had to wait until dawn to get my bearings." "Did you recognize the voices?" A long pause on the tape. "Yes. They were calling the names of the 2 hikers who disappeared last week, Robert and Margaret Chen. But sir, the strange thing is, one of the voices sounded like mine. Like I was calling my own name." The tape continued, but I was stuck on that last detail. The voices sometimes sounded like the listener's own voice, calling their own name, drawing them deeper into the forest. I kept listening. In the background of the interview, beneath the conversation, I could hear something else. Faint, but distinct. Footsteps, and whispered words I couldn't quite make out. I rewound and played that section again, turning the volume up. The words became clearer. "Listen. Come find us. We're waiting. We're still here." My hands started shaking. This tape was from 1966, over 50 years old, and it contained the same anomalous sounds as Wade's tape, as Sullivan's tape. Whatever was doing this had been doing it for decades at least, possibly much longer. I spent the rest of Friday and all of Saturday listening to every audio recording in the archive that came from the Mount Hood area. Most contained nothing unusual, but a few, maybe 1 in every 10, had those same background sounds. Footsteps, whispers, names being called, and the sounds got clearer the more I listened, as if my ears were becoming more attuned to hearing them. By Saturday evening, I could hear them even when I wasn't playing the tapes. Soft whispers in my apartment, footsteps in the hallway outside, my name being called from rooms I knew were empty. I was losing time, too. I'd sit down to listen to a tape, and suddenly hours would have passed. I'd find notes I'd written that I didn't remember writing. My phone would show missed calls from the office, from Mark's, from my supervisor, but I didn't remember hearing the phone ring. On Sunday morning, I woke up, though I didn't remember falling asleep, and found my living room in disarray. Papers everywhere, photographs of the forest spread across the floor, maps pinned to the walls with string connecting different locations. It looked like a conspiracy theorist's lair, or the workspace of someone having a breakdown. Maybe both. In the center of it all, on my coffee table, was Wade's tape, and Sullivan's tape, and my cassette player, plugged in, ready to go. I didn't remember bringing them home from my locker, but there they were. And next to them was a note in my own handwriting. Tonight. Go tonight. They're waiting. I should have called someone. Should have told my supervisor what was happening, asked for help, admitted I was in over my head. Instead, I packed a bag. Flashlight, extra batteries, my service weapon, water, energy bars. The essentials for going into the forest at night. I knew it was a bad idea. Knew that everyone who'd gotten too close to this, Wade, Sullivan, the hikers, the loggers, all of them, had either died, disappeared, or spent the rest of their lives running. But I also knew I didn't have a choice anymore. The door had been opened. The invitation had been accepted. And something was calling me back to Bull Run, back to the forest, back to whatever thin place existed there where the impossible bled through into reality. I loaded both tapes into my bag along with the cassette player. Then I drove east on Highway 26 as the sun set behind me, painting the sky blood red. I reached Station 7 around 9 p.m. The forest was completely dark, my headlights the only illumination on the overgrown access road. I parked and sat in my car for a long moment, listening to the tick of the cooling engine, trying to talk myself out of this. But the whispers were so loud now I could barely hear my own thoughts. Names being called, footsteps circling my car, my name over and over. Archer. Archer, come. Listen. Find us. I grabbed my bag and flashlight and started walking toward the station. The forest was utterly silent. No insects, no nightbirds, no wind, just my footsteps on the trail and that other sound, those other footsteps, keeping pace with me in the darkness. Station 7 looked different at night. More solid somehow, less abandoned. Lights flickered in the windows. Impossible lights, there was no power to the building. And as I approached, I could hear sounds from inside. Radio static, voices talking, someone moving around. I pushed the door open. The interior was exactly as we'd left it on Thursday. Empty, dusty, debris scattered across the floor. But I could hear it so clearly now, like there was a radio playing, a conversation happening, someone living and working in a building that had been abandoned for 30 years. I pulled out the cassette player and Wade's tape. My hands moved automatically, loading the tape, pressing play, as if I'd done it 1,000 times before. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd been doing it for days, and just didn't remember. Wade's voice filled the empty station. Personal notes. September 12th, 10:30 p.m. But this time, when the tape played, something else happened. The station changed around me. The debris faded, the decay reversed, and suddenly I was standing in a functional ranger station circa 1987. The desk was whole, papers neatly organized. The bulletin board was covered with maps and notices. A radio crackled on the desk. And standing in the corner, looking at me with hollow eyes, was a man I recognized from his personnel file photo. Harrison Wade. You listened, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. You opened the door all the way. What is this? I managed to ask. This is where they keep us. The ones who listened too closely. The ones who tried to understand. He gestured around the station. We're not really here, Archer. we're somewhere else, somewhere adjacent. The forest has us now, like it has everyone who heard the voices and followed them. How do I get out? Wade laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't. Once you're here, you stay here. Walking in circles, lost, calling out, hoping someone will hear. But they can't, because we're not in the forest anymore. We're in the spaces between, the thin places that Pemberton talked about. Other figures emerged from the shadows. Michael Sullivan, looking exactly as he had in 1987, face gaunt with fear. The four hikers, David and Linda Brennan, Scott and Jennifer Morrison, still in their camping gear, still searching for a way out they'd never find. "We tried to warn you," Sullivan said. "The tapes were warnings. Don't listen, don't come here. But the more you listen, the more you become part of it, until you can't help but come." I looked at the cassette player, still playing Wade's tape. The voices on it were clearer than ever now, and I realized why. They weren't anomalies. They weren't audio artifacts. They were real voices. Voices of people trapped in this in-between place, speaking through the recordings, trying to warn anyone who would listen, trying to ensure they weren't forgotten. "How many?" I asked. "How many are trapped here?" Wade shrugged. "I've counted at least 40 over the years I've been here. Could be more. The forest is big, and we're scattered through it. All of us walking in circles, all of us calling out, none of us finding the way out. There has to be a way. If there is, no one's found it yet. And believe me, we've tried." The station began to fade around me. The walls became translucent, and through them I could see the forest, but wrong, distorted, like looking at it through water. The trees went on forever, repeating in impossible patterns. And everywhere figures walking, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all moving through the endless woods, all searching, all lost. The tape, one of the hikers, Jennifer Morrison, said, "Destroy the tape. Maybe if there are no more recordings, no more people will come. No more will be trapped." I ejected the cassette from the player. It felt ordinary in my hands, just plastic and magnetic tape. But I knew what it was now, not evidence. A trap, a doorway that only opened one way. I found my lighter in my pocket and flicked it on. Held the tape above the flame, watching the plastic begin to melt. "Wait," Wade said. "If you destroy that tape, all record of what happened to us disappears. We'll be truly lost then, forgotten, as if we never existed." I lowered the lighter. "What do you want me to do?" "Get out," Sullivan said. "If you can. And tell people what happened here, not the official report, not the sanitized version. The truth. Tell them about the thin places, about what the forest does to people who listen too closely. Make sure we're not forgotten." "How do I get out?" They looked at each other, these ghosts or echoes or whatever they were. Finally, Wade spoke. "The tape brought you here. Maybe it can take you back. But you have to want to leave more than you want to understand. That's the trick. Most people who come here, they want answers so badly they can't let go. They stay, trying to figure it out, until they realize they can't leave anymore." I looked at the tape in my hand, melted and ruined now. Then I loaded Sullivan's tape, the one I'd found at the station, into the player, pressed rewind, and played it backward. The station began to solidify again, but this time in reverse. The figures faded. The forest beyond the walls became opaque, and I felt myself pulled backward, like being dragged through water, everything distorting and stretching. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor of Station 7, the real Station 7, abandoned and decaying, smelling of mold and forest rot. My flashlight had rolled a few feet away, still on, illuminating dust motes in the air. The cassette player was next to me, Sullivan's tape inside, playing normally now. I ejected the tape and stood up on shaky legs. My watch said it was 3:47 a.m. I'd been in the station for 6 hours, though it had felt like only minutes. I gathered my equipment and walked out into the night. The forest was still silent, but it felt different now. Less threatening, more sad. Like it was mourning all the people it had taken, all the people still trapped in those thin places between here and there. I hiked back to my car as dawn broke over the mountains, gray light filtering through the trees. When I reached the parking lot, I checked my phone. 47 missed calls, 23 voicemails. The most recent was from my supervisor, timestamp 11 p.m. the previous night. "Archer, where are you? We need to talk. Call me as soon as you get this." I drove back to Portland in silence, not listening to the radio, not thinking about anything except the road ahead. When I got to my apartment, I found a notice taped to my door. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation, ordered by my supervisor. Effective immediately. I was on administrative leave pending review. They'd been to my apartment, seen the maps and the notes and the photos. They thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. I certainly couldn't explain what had happened in any way they'd believe. I went inside and looked at the chaos of my investigation. Papers everywhere, string connecting locations, printed photos of missing persons dating back a century. And in the center of it all, the 2 cassette tapes. Wade's and Sullivan's. Evidence that couldn't be explained, proof that couldn't be verified, truth that would never be believed. I gathered all the tapes, Wade's, Sullivan's, and the others I'd copied from the archives, and put them in a metal lockbox. Then I wrote a report, the most detailed and thorough report of my career, documenting everything I'd found, everything I'd experienced, everything I'd learned about the thin places in the Bull Run forest. I knew the report would be buried, just like Wade's had been. I knew they'd dismiss it as the delusions of an agent who'd been working too hard, who'd gotten too obsessed with a cold case, who'd lost perspective. But I wrote it anyway because Wade had asked me to, because Sullivan had asked me to, because 40 people or more were still trapped in that forest, walking in circles, calling out, hoping someone would remember they existed. The psychiatric evaluation took 3 weeks. I was diagnosed with severe stress and possible dissociative episodes, prescribed medication and mandatory counseling. Relieved of field duty and reassigned to desk work, case review, nothing that would require me to investigate active crimes. They were gentle about it, professional. Nobody accused me of anything. They just made it clear that my days as an investigator were over. I'd seen too much, gone too deep, lost the objectivity required for the work. Maybe they were right. 6 months later, I submitted my resignation. 24 years old, fully vested in my pension. They accepted it without question, probably relieved to be rid of an agent who'd become a liability. I moved out of Portland, out of Oregon entirely, bought a small house in rural Montana, far from any forests, far from any thin places where the boundaries might be weak. I don't listen to cassette tapes anymore. Don't investigate cold cases. Don't think too hard about what might be waiting in the spaces between things. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I hear them. Footsteps outside my window. Whispers in empty rooms, my name being called from somewhere far away. And I know they're still there, still trapped, still walking in circles through an impossible forest, waiting for someone to find them. The lockbox with the tapes is buried in my backyard, 6 feet deep, sealed in concrete. I told myself it was to keep them safe, to preserve the evidence. But the truth is simpler. I buried them because I was afraid. Afraid that if I kept them in the house, I'd listen to them again. Afraid that if I listened one more time, I wouldn't be able to stop. Afraid that the next time I heard those voices calling, I'd answer. And I'd never come back. The official FBI report on the Bull Run disappearances remains open but inactive. 4 hikers missing since August 1987. No bodies ever found. No evidence recovered. Status, presumed dead. But I know the truth. They're not dead. They're somewhere else, walking through trees that repeat infinitely, calling out to anyone who might hear, trapped in a recording that plays forever, waiting for the tape to finally run out. Sometimes I wonder if Harrison Wade was right, if there really are thin places where the boundaries break down. If the world is full of spaces between, and if enough people find their way into those spaces, do they eventually break through? Do they finally come back? I don't know, and I hope I never find out. Because every night, just before I fall asleep, I hear that same whisper, the one that's been following me since I first played Wade's tape. Listen. And every night, I have to remind myself not to. When the file landed on my desk, it had already been through 6 different agents, all of whom had passed on it. My name is Catherine Monroe, forensic analyst with the FBI for 11 years, specializing in missing persons. I don't usually work cold cases this old, but my supervisor thought I might see something the others had missed. The file was labeled Case File 87 NWW Silent in faded typewriter ink. March 1987. Inside was an incident report from Forest Service pilot Gordon Walsh, dated March 17, 1987. During routine aerial survey of Tillamook State Forest, observed unmapped settlement at coordinates 45.7234 degree N, 123.4521 WW. Approximately 15 to 20 structures appeared inhabited. No roads visible. Location not marked on any maps. A grainy aerial photograph showed buildings in a clearing, arranged in a rough circle. Ground team report from March 19th. No settlement found, no structures. Old growth forest, undisturbed. But Walsh kept taking photographs. April, May, different dates. All showed the settlement. Yet, every ground team found only forest. The last document in the file was a memo from an FBI agent named Robert Keating, dated June 3, 1987. Have reviewed Forest Service reports regarding alleged settlement at coordinates 45.7234 degree N, 123.4521 WW. Aerial photographs appear authentic, but ground verification has repeatedly failed to locate any structures or evidence of habitation. Recommend psychological evaluation of pilot Walsh and closure of case. No evidence of criminal activity. Likely explanation: photographic anomaly combined with navigational error. Case closed. Except it hadn't been closed. Not really. Someone had kept adding to the file over the years. Newspaper clippings about missing persons in the Tillamook area. Anonymous letters claiming knowledge of a hidden settlement in the Coast Range. And, most recently, a note from a retired Forest Service employee named Margaret Chen, dated October 2018. I worked the Tillamook district in the 80s. I remember the Walsh incident. We all thought he was seeing things, but I saw those photographs. They were real. The settlement was real. Something was there. But every time we sent people to look, they found nothing. Or they said they found nothing. I'm old now, and I don't have long. Someone needs to know the truth. Gordon Walsh wasn't crazy. There was something there. And I think it's still there. Chen had died 2 weeks after sending that note. Natural causes, according to the death certificate. She was 83. It took 3 days to track down the originals at the National Archives in Seattle. The archivist, David Brenner, warned me, "That collection has issues, storage damage, and people report seeing different things in the same photographs." In the climate-controlled viewing room, I examined Walsh's aerial photos. March 17th showed the settlement clearly. 20 structures in a circle, smoke from chimneys, vehicles, small figures that might be people. The May photograph was hazier, the forest around it seeming to blur. Then it happened. The photograph shifted. For a second, the settlement disappeared. Just forest. Then flickered back, solid again. I stood, walked to the window, told myself I'd been staring too closely, but I knew what I'd seen. In the ground team files, I found a torn note from March 25, 1987. Found something at 14:20 hours, clearing, recent campfire, boot prints, following trail north. Will radio when the note ended mid-sentence. The team leader, Michael Chen, retired in 1988. Died by suicide in 2001. That evening, I analyzed the photos on my laptop. Zooming in on the March 17th image, I noticed something at the frame's edge. A second clearing, smaller, with what looked like a bus or RV. I searched missing vehicles databases. On April 2, 1987, the Wright family from Portland disappeared during a camping trip. Donald and Sarah Wright, daughters Emily and Jessica. Their 1984 Volkswagen Vanagon, white, was never found. Last seen March 29th at a gas station near Timber, the same day Walsh took his second aerial photographs. I stared at the blurred figures in the settlement center. One looked like a teenage girl, slim build, facing the camera. Emily or Jessica Wright. Maybe. I made my decision. I was going to those coordinates. I returned to Portland and requisitioned equipment. GPS, drone, thermal imaging, camping gear. My colleague James Keaton from Seattle agreed to accompany me, skeptical but willing. We drove to Tillamook State Forest Friday morning. At the last gas station in Timber, an old man looked at Walsh's photos and said, "There's stories about places in these woods that don't appear on maps. Places you can only find if you aren't looking for them." We hiked in at noon, following an old logging road that ended at a washout. The dense forest forced us to slow to less than a mile per hour. By 4 p.m., still 2 miles from the coordinates, we made camp. While gathering firewood, Keaton found tire tracks, recent, pressed deep into the moss. They headed east toward our target. That night, as darkness fell, the forest went silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. Then from the north, an engine sound, distant and low, cutting off abruptly. During my 2 a.m. watch, I saw lights moving through the trees. 5 or 6 yellowish lights like lanterns, moving in parallel lines toward the east. We broke camp at first light and pushed north through increasingly difficult terrain. Around 10 a.m., we found a fence, crude logs lashed with wire, stretching in both directions. Half a mile east, we found a gate with a modern padlock and a hand-painted sign, "Private property, no trespassing." We climbed over. The forest immediately felt different. Quieter, more still. There was wood smoke in the air. Through the trees ahead, I saw it. The settlement. 20 buildings arranged in a circle. Smoke rose from chimneys. Vehicles in the clearing. 2 pickups and a white Vanagon. "Holy shit," Keaton breathed. "It's actually here." We approached cautiously, weapons drawn. The settlement appeared deserted. We entered the nearest building, 1 room, bed, table, chairs, wood stove, everything covered in weeks of dust. A plate with dried food, a cup with evaporated liquid residue. "Someone was living here recently," Keaton said. We checked 4 buildings, all recently inhabited, beds slept in, clothes hanging, food in cupboards, but no people, abandoned suddenly. In the 4th building, I froze. The wall was covered in photographs, dozens of aerial views of the settlement. Walsh's photos were there, and others from different years, and in the corner, a photograph of me, taken yesterday in timber, standing by my car. Someone knew we were coming, Keaton said, pale. The central clearing had a circular area of bare earth with carved symbols forming patterns. Old, but recently refreshed. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have come here." "We need to leave," Keaton said. "Now." We started back toward the fence, moving quickly but carefully. And that's when I noticed something wrong. The GPS showed we were heading south, towards the direction we'd come from. But the forest looked different. The trees were in different positions. The terrain was unfamiliar. "Keaton, does this look right to you?" He stopped and checked his own GPS. "Coordinates say we're going the right way. But yeah, this doesn't look like the route we took in." We kept walking, following the GPS. But the forest continued to look wrong, unfamiliar, and after 20 minutes we should have reached the fence. But there was no fence. Just more forest, stretching endlessly in every direction. "We're lost," Keaton said. "How are we lost? We have GPS, we have coordinates, but we're fucking lost." I pulled out my satellite phone, standard equipment for deep wilderness work, and tried to call the Portland office. The phone had signal, 5 bars, but when I dialed, all I got was silence. No ring, no connection, nothing. "Try your phone," I told Keaton. He did, same result, full signal, no connection. "We're being jammed," he said. "Someone is jamming our communications." We walked for another hour. GPS showing we should have been well past the fence, well into familiar territory. But the forest remained strange, unfamiliar, and the fence never appeared. Then, as the sun started to sink toward the horizon, we heard it. Engine sounds, multiple engines coming from different directions, getting closer. They're hurting us, I realized. Whoever they are, they're pushing us somewhere. Back to the settlement? Maybe. Or somewhere else. The engine sounds grew louder, circling us, and we had no choice but to move away from them. The only direction that seemed clear was north, back toward the settlement. We emerged from the tree line as full darkness fell. The settlement was ahead of us, but it looked different now. Lights showed in the windows. Smoke rose thick from the chimneys, and figures moved between the buildings, dark silhouettes against the yellow light. "It's occupied," Keaton whispered. "It wasn't occupied an hour ago, but it is now." We backed into the trees, trying to stay out of sight. The figures continued their movements, going about some routine we couldn't understand. And then one of them stopped, turned, looked directly at where we were hiding. It was a woman, middle-aged, wearing practical outdoor clothing. She stood completely still, staring at our position, even though we were concealed in the shadows. Then she smiled and raised one hand, beckoning. "Run," Keaton said. We ran. We crashed through the forest, abandoning any attempt at stealth. Behind us, the engine sounds started up again, but this time they weren't circling. They were pursuing. Headlights flickered through the trees, multiple sets, crisscrossing beams that swept the darkness looking for us. "The GPS," I gasped as we ran. "Check the GPS." Keaton pulled his unit from his belt, nearly dropping it. "Still showing coordinates. We should be—" He stopped running, staring at the screen. "That's not possible." "What?" "According to this, we're right back at the settlement. but we've been running south for 10 minutes. We should be half a mile away. I checked my own GPS. Same reading. Coordinates 45.7234 de Gauer N 123 WW. The exact center of the settlement. But we weren't at the settlement. We were in deep forest, trees on all sides, no buildings visible. The engine sounds were getting closer. I could see headlights through the trees now, 2 sets converging on our position from different angles. "This way," Keaton said, choosing a direction at random. We ran again, pushing through underbrush, dodging trees in the darkness. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept us moving. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we broke out into a clearing. Not the settlement. A different clearing, smaller, with a single structure in the center. A cabin, old but intact, light showing in one window. The engine sounds had stopped. The forest around us was completely silent. "I don't like this," Keaton said. "This feels like a trap. Everywhere feels like a trap. At least there's light, shelter, and maybe whoever's in there can help us. Or they're part of whatever this is." He was probably right, but we needed to know. We needed to understand what was happening. We approached the cabin cautiously. The door was unlocked, opening silently when I pushed it. Inside was a single room, dimly lit by an oil lamp on a wooden table. The walls were covered with maps, dozens of them, some hand-drawn, some printed, all showing the same area of the Tillamook State Forest. And sitting at the table, hunched over one of the maps, was an old man. He looked up as we entered, showing no surprise at our appearance. "You found the settlement," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Who are you?" I demanded, hand on my weapon. "Gordon Walsh, former Forest Service pilot. I'm the one who reported it in 1987. I stared at him. Walsh was supposed to be in his 80s now, if he was still alive. This man looked the right age, weathered and thin, with the kind of tired eyes that came from carrying a secret for too long. "The settlement is real," I said. "We saw it, documented it. But then we got lost, and the GPS stopped working right, and you can't find your way out." Walsh finished. "I know. That's what it does. The settlement. It's not a place you can just visit and leave. It has rules, and if you don't follow them, it keeps you." "What rules?" He gestured to the maps on the walls. "I've been trying to figure that out for 31 years. The settlement exists, but not in the way normal places exist. It's like a recording that plays over and over. The same buildings, the same patterns, but the people change. And anyone who finds it, anyone who stays too long, becomes part of the recording." "That doesn't make sense," Keaton said. "No, it doesn't. But that's what happens. I've watched it happen. The people who lived there in 1987, I saw them in the photographs, same faces month after month. Then in 1988, new people. Different faces, but the same settlement. And they all seemed happy at first, content, like they'd found what they were looking for. But after a while," he trailed off, staring at one of the maps. "After a while, what?" "After a while they realized they couldn't leave, and by then it was too late." I sat down at the table, my mind racing. The Wright family. Donald and Sarah Wright, their daughters Emily and Jessica. They disappeared in March 1987. "Did you see them?" Walsh nodded slowly. "I saw them. Took photographs of their van in the settlement. But when ground teams went looking, they couldn't find anything. I thought maybe the family had moved on, driven out. But then I went back to the area myself, hiked in like you did, and I found the settlement. It was real, solid, actually there, and I saw them, the Wrights, living in one of the cabins. The girls were playing in the clearing. Did you talk to them? I tried, but they couldn't see me or wouldn't. It was like I wasn't there. I walked right up to them, called their names, but they looked right through me. He paused, his voice dropping. Then I tried to leave, and that's when I realized I was trapped. The forest just looped. Every direction I walked led back to the settlement. The GPS showed I was moving, but I always ended up in the same place. How did you get out? I didn't, not really. I'm still here. This cabin, this clearing, it's part of the loop too. I just exist in a different part of it than the settlement. I can move between the two, but I can't leave the area entirely. I've tried. For 31 years, I've tried. Keaton and I exchanged a glance. This man was either telling the truth, or he was insane. Or both. There has to be a way out, I said. We have equipment, GPS, satellite phones. That stuff doesn't work here. Not the way it should. The settlement exists in some kind of pocket, a loop. And once you're in the loop, your technology just reflects that. Your GPS shows you moving, but you're not. Not really. You're just cycling through the same space over and over. Then how do we break the loop? Walsh stood and walked to one of the maps on the wall, running his finger along a marked trail. There might be a way. I've been studying the pattern for years. The settlement moves, not physically, but the loop itself shifts. Every few years, the boundaries change slightly, and during the shift there's a window. Maybe an hour, maybe less, when the loop is weakest. When's the next shift? Tonight. Should start around midnight. But it's dangerous. During the shift, the settlement gets unstable. Things happen that don't make sense. Time moves strangely. And the people who live here, they know when the shift is coming. They don't like it when people try to leave. The people in the settlement, who are they? Lost hikers, mostly. People who came looking for something remote, something off the grid. The forest gave them what they wanted. A place hidden from the world. But it was more hidden than they realized. And now they're stuck. Just like me. Just like you. Why don't they try to leave? Some do, but most, he shook his head. Most don't want to anymore. They've been here so long they've forgotten why they came. Forgotten that there's a world outside. To them, this is the whole world. And anyone who tries to leave, who tries to break the loop, is a threat to that. I looked at my watch, 9:47 p.m. A little over 2 hours until midnight. What do we need to do? Walsh pointed to one of the hand-drawn maps. During the shift, you'll see them, markers. Not physical markers, but places where reality is thin. They look like distortions in the air, like heat shimmer. You have to find one and walk through it. That should take you outside the loop. Should? I've never done it myself. I've watched others try, some succeed. Some... He didn't finish the sentence. Some what? Some disappear entirely. Not into the settlement, not back to the outside world. Just gone. To wherever you go when you fall through the cracks. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. Walsh shared what food he had. Canned beans, stale bread, and told us more about the settlement. How he'd watched it change over the years. How he'd seen people arrive excited and hopeful, then watch them slowly realize they were trapped. How he'd tried to warn new arrivals, but they rarely listened until it was too late. Michael Chen, I said, remembering the torn note in the archive. The ranger who was on the 2nd ground team, did you know him? Walsh's face darkened. He found the settlement, found me. I tried to warn him, but he didn't believe me. Thought I was just a crazy old man living in the woods. He tried to hike out, got stuck in the loop. When he finally believed me, he panicked, started running, trying to force his way out. I followed him as far as I could, but then I lost sight of him. Found his pack later, torn apart, but no sign of Chen himself. He retired in 1988. He made it out. Walsh shook his head. Something made it out, but I don't think it was Chen. Not all of him, anyway. At 11:45 p.m., Walsh led us to the edge of his clearing. It'll start soon. When you see the shimmer, head toward it. Don't stop, don't look back. And whatever you hear, voices, engines, anything, don't respond. Just keep moving. What about you? I asked. I'm too old, too tired, and I've been in the loop too long. I don't think I could leave even if I wanted to. This is my home now. He managed a weak smile. But you two, you still have a chance. Take it. At exactly midnight, the forest changed. It was subtle at first, a flicker at the edge of vision, a sense that the trees were in slightly different positions than they had been a moment ago. Then the shimmer appeared, a distortion in the air about 50 yards away, like looking through heat waves on a hot day. There, Walsh pointed. Go. Now. We ran toward the shimmer. Behind us, I heard engines starting up, heard voices calling our names. But we didn't stop. The shimmer grew larger as we approached, and I could see through it, see something on the other side. Normal forest. Real forest. Outside the loop. We were almost there when I heard the voice. A woman's voice, clear and close. Agent Monroe, wait. I slowed, turning. Keaton grabbed my arm. Don't look back. But I'd already seen her. The woman from the settlement, the one who'd beckoned to us. She was standing between us and Walsh's cabin, and she wasn't alone. There were others with her. Dozens of people, all standing motionless, all watching us with expressions I couldn't read. You don't have to leave, the woman said. You can stay. We have room. We have food. It's peaceful here, safe. Kath, come on! Keaton was pulling me towards the shimmer. The woman took a step closer. Out there, you'll write your report. You'll document what you found. And more people will come. More people will get trapped. But if you stay, if you help us protect this place, keep it hidden, no one else has to suffer. She's right, I said, and Keaton looked at me in horror. More people could get trapped if we report this. Then we don't report it. We say we found nothing, but we are leaving, Kath, now. He pulled me toward the shimmer, and I let him. But I looked back one more time at the woman and the crowd behind her, and I saw their faces clearly for the first time. They weren't angry. They were pleading, desperate, as if they were the ones who wanted to leave but couldn't, and watching us go was torture. We hit the shimmer, and everything went white. When my vision cleared, we were standing on the old logging road, the washout visible ahead of us. My GPS showed our correct position, 5 miles from our car, outside the coordinates of the settlement. We'd made it out. We hiked back to the vehicle in stunned silence, neither of us speaking until we were safely inside with the doors locked. What the hell was that? Keaton finally asked. What did we just experience? I pulled out my camera and started reviewing the footage. The settlement was there. Buildings, vehicles, everything we'd seen. But when I got to the shots from inside the cabins, the images were wrong. The walls in the photographs showed different things than I remembered seeing. The food on the plate looked different. The clothing on the pegs wasn't the same. And the aerial footage from the drone was the strangest. It showed the settlement, but flickering, as if the camera couldn't decide whether it was looking at buildings or forest. The image shifted back and forth, sometimes showing structures, sometimes showing nothing but trees. The evidence is corrupted, I said. Or changing. like everything else about that place. We have to report this. Report what? That we found a magical settlement that exists in a loop of space-time? That we met a man who's supposedly been trapped there for 31 years? They'll think we're insane. Then we don't mention the weird parts. We just say we found an illegal settlement, took photos, recommend a full investigation with proper support. I nodded, but I was thinking about Gordon Walsh, still trapped in that cabin, about the people in the settlement living their looped existence, about Michael Chen, who'd made it out but left something of himself behind. And I was thinking about what Walsh had said. During the shift, some people disappeared entirely, not into the loop, not back outside, just gone. What if that's what happened to us? What if we didn't actually escape? What if we just shifted to a different part of the loop, one that looked like the real world? I pushed that thought away. We were out. We were safe. The GPS confirmed it. The logging road was real. Everything was real, wasn't it? I submitted my initial report 3 days later, once Keaton and I had both submitted to mandatory debriefing and psychological evaluation. The debriefing had been brutal. Hours of questions, skeptical looks, suggestions that we'd gotten lost and imagined the settlement, that stress and exhaustion had caused us to hallucinate. But we had evidence. Photographs, video, GPS logs. The Bureau couldn't simply dismiss it all. My report was clinical, careful to separate observed facts from interpretation. On date, Special Agent James Keaton and I conducted a field investigation at coordinates 45.723 for DGs N 123.4521 DGW in response to historical reports of an unmapped settlement in Tillamook State Forest. We located a group of structures matching descriptions in the 1987 Forest Service reports. The settlement appeared to be recently occupied but was empty at the time of our arrival. We documented the site with photographs and video before experiencing navigational difficulties and extracting from the area. Recommend full investigation with appropriate support and resources. Clean. Professional. Leaving out the parts about the loop, about Walsh, about reality bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. The response came 2 weeks later. My supervisor, Assistant Director Patricia Marks, called me into her office along with Keaton. "I've reviewed your report and the supporting evidence," she said, laying several folders on her desk. "And I've consulted with the Seattle office, the Forest Service, and several other agencies. We have a problem." "The settlement," I said. "The settlement doesn't exist, not officially. The coordinates you visited are federal land, designated wilderness. No permits for private structures have ever been issued for that area. No private land claims, nothing. With all due respect, ma'am, we saw it. We documented it. Whatever the legal status, the physical reality is that structures exist at those coordinates." Marks opened one of the folders and pulled out a sheet of paper, a satellite image dated 3 days ago. "This is current high-resolution imagery of your coordinates. What do you see?" I looked at the image. Dense forest. No clearing. No buildings. Just trees. "That's impossible," Keaton said. "We were there less than 2 weeks ago." "I know, and that's the problem. Your photographs and video clearly show structures, but current imagery shows none. Either the structures were removed in the past 2 weeks, which would require significant equipment and labor that would have been noticed, or what?" I asked. Marks looked uncomfortable. "Or your evidence is somehow inaccurate. Corrupted. Anomalous. You think we faked it? No, I think you saw something, but I don't think it was what you believe you saw." She pulled out more images, printouts of frames from my video. "Look at these timestamps." I examined them. The video showed our exploration of the settlement, but the timestamps were wrong. They jumped forward and backward, seemingly at random. One frame would show 1423, the next 1415, then 1447, as if time itself had been unstable while we were recording. Technical malfunction, Keaton suggested. All your equipment, cameras, phones, GPS units, all malfunctioning in exactly the same way? Marks shook her head. No. Something about that location affected your equipment. Or affected you. I've had the footage analyzed by our technical unit. They say the images show signs of, they called it temporal inconsistency. What does that mean? It means different parts of your video were recorded at different times, even though the continuous timestamp suggests otherwise, as if you were experiencing time non-linearly while you were there. I thought about the loop, about Walsh's claim that the settlement existed in a pocket, that time moved strangely inside it. So, what's the Bureau's official position? Marks closed the folders. Officially, the case remains open but inactive. The evidence is inconclusive. The site will be monitored via satellite, but no further ground investigation is authorized at this time. You're burying it, I said. I'm protecting my agents. Whatever you experienced at those coordinates, it's not something we're equipped to investigate. Not with standard procedures and equipment. And I'm not sending more people into a situation where GPS fails, communications fail, and time itself becomes unreliable. She wasn't wrong, but it felt like giving up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the people in the settlement, about Walsh in his cabin, about all the evidence that kept shifting and changing as if it couldn't decide what was real. Around 2 a.m., I opened my laptop and looked at the aerial photographs again. The ones Walsh had taken in 1907, the ones I'd photographed in Seattle. And I noticed something I hadn't before. In the corner of the March 17, 1907 photo, the first one Walsh had taken, there was a figure standing at the edge of the settlement. A person facing the camera, as if they knew someone was taking the photograph. I enhanced the image, zooming in on the figure. The resolution was terrible, the image pixelated and grainy. But I could make out features. The person was wearing modern clothing, jeans, a jacket, not 1987 style, more recent. And the person looked like me, not just similar, identical, the same height, the same build, even the same jacket I'd been wearing during our expedition. I checked the date on the photograph again, March 17, 1987. 31 years before I'd visited the site. 31 years before I was born. I closed the laptop, hands shaking. Told myself it was just a coincidence, a trick of light and shadow and poor resolution. But I knew what I'd seen. The loop didn't just exist in space. It existed in time, too. And if Walsh was right, if people could get trapped in it, experiencing the same events over and over, how did I know I'd escaped? How did I know I wasn't still in the loop, living the same days repeatedly, writing the same report, seeing the same evidence? I grabbed my phone and called Keaton. He answered on the third ring, voice groggy. Kath, it's 2 a.m. Do you remember what day we went to the settlement? What? Yeah, it was Friday, the 23rd. What month? A pause. October 23rd. Why? And today is November 7th. Kath, what's going on? Check your calendar. Tell me what day it actually is. I heard rustling, then silence, then Keaton's voice, very quiet. It says October 23rd. My blood ran cold. That's not possible. We submitted our report. We've been back for 2 weeks. According to my phone, we just got back. Today, a few hours ago. Another pause. Kath, I remember 2 weeks. I remember the debriefing, the psych eval, everything. But my phone says it all happened today. I looked at my own phone. The date read October 23rd, but I had vivid memories of 2 weeks passing, of writing the report, submitting it, waiting for responses. "We're still in the loop," I said. "We never left. We just think we did. That's not possible. We're in Portland. We're at our homes. We're not in the forest." The loop doesn't have to be the forest. Walsh said it shifts, that the boundaries change. What if we brought it with us? What if by finding the settlement we became part of the loop? Keaton was silent for a long time. Then, "If that's true, how do we get out? How do we break it?" I didn't have an answer. We talked for another hour, comparing memories, trying to find inconsistencies, trying to determine what was real. But everything seemed real. Portland was real. Our apartments were real. Our jobs were real. Except the date. The date kept resetting to October 23rd. Over the next few days, or what felt like days though the calendar never advanced, I obsessively reviewed all my evidence. The photographs, the video, the GPS logs. And I started noticing things. Small changes in the images. Details that shifted between viewings. In one photograph, a window on one of the cabins would be open. In the next viewing, it would be closed. A vehicle that was present in one frame would be missing in another. The settlement was still changing, still unstable, even in the recordings. And then I found something else. Hidden in the metadata of one of my drone videos was a file I didn't remember creating. A text document, just a few lines. "If you're reading this, you're still in the loop. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to escape. The more you struggle, the tighter it holds you. The only way out is to stop trying to leave. Accept that you're here. Accept that this is real. Then maybe you can find the seam." The file was dated October 23rd, but the creation time was listed as unknown. I showed it to Keaton. He stared at it for a long time. "Did you write this?" "I don't remember writing it, but it's in my files on my equipment." "What does it mean, find the seam?" I thought about Walsh's cabin, about the shimmer we'd walked through to escape, about how reality had flickered and shifted at the boundaries. "The loop has edges," I said. "Places where it connects to the real world. Seams in the fabric. If we can find one, we can slip through," Keaton finished. "But how do we find it if we don't know where to look?" I pulled up the satellite imagery of the coordinates, the recent image that showed only forest. Stared at it, looking for anything unusual. And I saw it. A slight discoloration in one corner, a subtle variation in the tree density that formed a pattern. Not random, deliberate. The pattern was coordinates, different coordinates, marked in the vegetation itself as if the trees had been arranged to spell out numbers. 45, 7, 8, 9, 1, 9, N, 123, 40, 12, W. About 3 miles from the settlement. "That's our seam," I said. "That's where we need to go." We drove back to Tillamook State Forest the next day. Or what we thought was the next day. The calendar still read October 23rd, but subjectively time was passing. We were experiencing a linear progression of events, even if the date refused to change. The new coordinates were accessible via a different logging road, one that was in better condition than the route we'd taken before. We parked and hiked in, using GPS to navigate to the exact spot. We found it after about 2 hours. A small clearing, unremarkable except for one detail. A single dead tree standing in the center, its bark carved with the same symbols we'd seen in the settlement's central circle. "This is it," Keaton said. "I can feel it. This place is different." He was right. The air felt wrong here, slightly thicker, as if we were underwater. Sounds were muffled, and at the edges of vision, I could see that shimmer again, that distortion in reality. "What do we do?" I asked. The note said to stop trying to leave, to accept we're here. Keaton looked at the dead tree, at the symbols carved into it. Maybe that's the key. We stop fighting the loop, we accept it, and then... He reached out and placed his palm on the tree trunk, on one of the symbols. The air around us rippled. The shimmer grew stronger, spreading out from the tree like waves in water. I put my hand next to his, touching a different symbol. The world lurched sideways. And then we were somewhere else. Not the forest, not Portland. Somewhere between. A gray space, featureless and infinite, where the normal rules of distance and direction didn't apply. And standing in that space, I could see them. All of them. Gordon Walsh, looking younger than he should. Michael Chen, still in his Ranger uniform from 1987. The Wright family, parents and daughters standing together. And dozens of others, scattered across the gray infinity, all existing in the gaps between moments. "You found the seam," Walsh said, his voice echoing from everywhere at once. "Not many do. How do we get out?" I asked. "How do we get back to the real world?" You are in the real world. This is part of it. The part that exists between the parts. Some of us are stuck here. Others, like you, are just passing through. Whether you stay or go depends on what you believe is real. I believe Portland is real. I believe my life is real. Then go back to it. But understand, you've been changed by this place. You've seen what exists between. You can't unsee it, and it will follow you in small ways. Dates that don't make sense. Time that flows strangely. Moments where you are not quite sure what's real. "I can live with that," I said. "As long as I can live." Walsh nodded. "Then go. The seam works both ways. But Agent Monroe, don't come back. Don't try to investigate further. Some things are better left mysterious." I looked at Keaton. He nodded. Together, we turned away from the gray space, away from the trapped people, and walked toward what felt like the direction we'd come from. The world snapped back into place with a jarring suddenness. We were standing by the dead tree, hands still pressed against the symbols. But something was different. The air felt normal, the shimmer was gone. And when I checked my phone, the date had changed. November 7th. 2 weeks had passed in an instant. Or we'd finally broken free of the loop that kept resetting us to October 23rd. Or both. I wasn't sure anymore what was real and what wasn't. We hiked back to the car without speaking. Drove back to Portland in silence. And that night, I wrote my final report. The real one. The one that included everything. The loop, Walsh, the gray space between, all of it. I knew the Bureau would bury it. Would label it the work of an agent who'd been in the field too long. Who'd seen too much strangeness. But I wrote it anyway because Walsh had asked me to document the truth, and because the people trapped in that loop deserved to be remembered. I ended the report with a recommendation. Designate coordinates 45.7234 degree N, 123.4521 degree W as a no investigation zone. Mark it restricted. Don't send anyone else there. Let the settlement exist in its loop. Let the trapped people remain trapped, because the alternative, trying to extract them, would only trap more people. The Bureau never responded to my report. It simply disappeared into the classified archives, marked with a code I didn't recognize. 3 months later, I transferred to the Quantico training facility. Requested reassignment away from field investigations, away from cold cases, away from anything that might take me back to the forests of Oregon. Keaton did the same, transferring to white-collar crime in Phoenix. We don't talk about what happened. We don't compare notes or try to reconcile our memories. We both know that the more we think about it, the more unstable our own reality becomes. But sometimes, late at night, I open my GPS app on my phone and check those coordinates. 457234 Guiu N 123 Aus 4521 Dig do W. The satellite imagery always shows the same thing. Dense forest, no clearing, no structures. Except once. Just once, about 6 months ago, the imagery glitched. For exactly 3 seconds before refreshing to forest again, it showed the settlement. Buildings, cleared land, vehicles. And standing in the central circle, looking up at the satellite, a figure I recognized. It was me, or someone who looked exactly like me, waving at the camera. I haven't checked the coordinates since. Because Gordon Walsh was right. I was changed by that place. I've seen what exists between the moments, between the places. I've walked in the gray space where the trapped people wait. And I know that somewhere, in a loop of time and space that touches our world but doesn't quite exist in it, there's a version of me still standing in that settlement. Still investigating, still trying to find the way out. Still trapped. And every time I think about it too hard, every time I let myself wonder if I really escaped or if this is just another part of the loop, my phone shows October 23rd for just a moment before correcting itself. That's how I know Walsh was right about something else too. The loop follows you. Not always. Not constantly. But in small ways, in moments of doubt, it reminds you that you've touched something that doesn't follow the rules. And it's still there, waiting in the forest, ready to trap anyone else who gets too curious, who follows the wrong coordinates, who believes that every place can be found if you just look hard enough. Some places don't want to be found. And some places, once you find them, never let you go, not completely.